Hey, what's happening, everyone? Welcome to the program. Today is March 28th, 26th? March 26th. What the heck? It's new MAME day because whoever compiles MAME is in some time zone where it's Wednesday already. Last Wednesday of the month. Get your new MAME. Get it fresh. Get it hot. Get it while it still supports whatever the heck they got into this month. The Macintosh TV, I think, is one of the new systems supported in this month's version of MAME. Well, here we are. We all made it to the other side of GDC, I suppose. I mean, I didn't attend the show. I would have liked to. Yeah, I don't know. I think I want to get back on the road later this year, kind of maybe after the summer or something like that. We'll see how it goes. Maybe like a PAX Prime. Maybe we could swing that. But there'll be a. Well, I guess they announced a little Summer Games Fest. That got confirmed and announced and all that stuff. And I am all set for that stuff and excited to see what the big summer showcase ends up being. It's weird to, I was gonna say it's weird to be thinking about it in March, but honestly, with the way E3 used to work, we were having E3 conversations in like December or January, so maybe it's not that weird in the grand scheme. Yeah, I don't know. We're also kind of coming out of PAX East, and so it's interesting to kind of see did anything happen, and did anything big happen in the world of video games, from a consumer-facing kind of perspective, right? GDC is not really focused on that sort of stuff ever, so it's never going to be like a major, massive show for announcements. But usually we get a thing or two. There's kind of a thing or two, we'll get into the news. But I've been hanging out here over the weekend, messing with this thing. This is the 400 Mini. This is the tiny Atari 400 that is going to be shipping at the end of this week, I guess, is when this thing is finally out. It's on. When they first started taking pre-orders, they were only taking it from the Atari website, and then much later, it appeared on Amazon and everywhere else, and all that sort of stuff. So they seem like they'll be fairly widely available. It doesn't seem like something that's going to immediately sell out or something like this. This is great. I love this as a, well, look, okay, I guess I would say I'm a little torn on it. I love that this exists. The Atari 400 was my first, this was my first home computer. And it meant a whole lot to me. This crappy little membrane keyboard, basically, the cassette recorder that went with it, so you could load games off tapes if you needed to. But most of the games that you loaded off of tape was a lot of the educational stuff. It was like States and Capitals or Hangman. There was a game, I believe it was called Kingdom, that was sort of a text-based, you're running a kingdom. You're like, oh, we got to have this many bushels of this and this many bushels of that I used to play quite a bit. And then the cartridges, you would hit this little thing and the cartridge thing would pop up and that's where you would plug in Star Raiders or Pac-Man or, Donkey Kong and some of the other stuff that came out on cartridge. And this machine, a somewhat bigger version of this machine is kind of what got me going and sort of kept me going through what we think of as the video game crash. That kind of 83 to 85, 86 kind of zone there where the video game console market fell apart. The Atari 2600 bottomed out. The 5200 never really seemed like it mattered. The 7800, when it finally came out, was I don't know. It always seemed like a hilarious joke to me. But the computers kept going, and this is basically, if you've seen an Atari 5200, this is basically the same hardware inside one of these, the same games, the same basic concept. The 5200 came with a weird controller that's kind of and didn't have a keyboard, so that's kind of the weird the differences there. But eventually the 400 would get replaced with an Atari 800, which had a full-fledged keyboard, and we got a disk drive with it at that point, and so I could buy a copy of Pooyan and load it off of floppy disks and play that Konami arcade classic in my home. Pooyan. Yeah. But the 400 is what started it all. So this one, when this got announced, I don't know, man. There's something about the last couple of years of really thinking about, I don't know, my early days with games or whatever else. Like, this was kind of it, man. This and the 800 were, like, I didn't really, I wasn't really into much else, other than playing games on these things. And, I've said it before, our house flooded in 82, and like all, we lost all of our material possessions in that flood. Like, the story was that there was always like 4 to 5 feet of water in the house or whatever. When we got back, anything that was still in the house was just like waterlogged, covered in muddy, dirty, disgusting water, and was trashed. And so, most of my toys and all that other stuff that I had as a kid was, a lot of that stuff was just kind of gone. And, we had to live in a hotel for a while. And yeah, I don't know. It was a very weird time, but the Atari 400 and 800 were always there for me. So, like I feel weird emotional ties to it. And so the other thing I'll say is that it feels like this specific device, the Atari 400 and its predecessor, the 800, no one ever talks about them. It doesn't have the cachet that the Commodore 64 had. It doesn't even have the cachet that like the Apple II had, because at least the Apple computers were in so many schools that they were ubiquitous, like to the point where I still to this day have a collection of floppy disks for an Apple II, because I always knew I would spend an hour with one every day at school. And so like I had a collection of programs and games and other stuff meant for an Apple II. Just because I had such ready access to one. But the Atari, the Atari 8-bit home computers always feels like they're just completely lost to time. And no one's ever talking about them and all this other stuff. So I will say, the resurgence of Atari as a brand here with the stuff they've been acquiring and there's been a lot of crappy blockchain junk and speaker hats and just stupid shit that they've done over these last few years. But kind of as they've emerged to kind of start putting out gaming products again, and buying Digital Eclipse and buying Moby games and buying Atari Age and some of this weird stuff that they've been doing on the side, it's been cool to see them also just like, put out some of the stuff that, that put them on the map to begin with. And that reissue of the Atari 2600 that they made is kind of a cool device. Even, it's emulation focused. It's dumping the carts and all that stuff, but that's a pretty neat device overall. This is made by the same company that made the tiny Commodore 64 and the tiny Amiga, and the tiny VIC-20, which is also just a Commodore. It's probably all the exact same guts inside of all of these things, because they're just tiny emulation boxes, right? But having this form factor is great. I don't know, man. It's cool. Now, as for the device, once you hook it up and plug it in, I'll probably have more to say about that when I think I maybe need to get a hold of a firmware update, but basically this thing's got 25 games installed on it, and they ship it with a recreation of the original Atari joystick that they have added some buttons to get to a menu, and then there's like a shoulder button here, like a button 2, which is crazy. And then also the red rings, they've issued this controller before. There are buttons in the red ring here as well that you can use to kind of get back to the menu while you're playing a game, and some of the other external features you would want to do. This is a USB controller. And you launch it, and it's got a carousel of the games, and you scroll through them, and it'll do save states, and it'll do basically what you would expect it to do. It'll play these 25 games, and the games are kind of it's got fucking bangers on it, but also like I don't know that I ever want to play basketball for the 400 ever again. Crystal Castles, that's a pretty good version of the game. It's a pretty good version of Missile Command. It's like some of the Atari arcade games that you would, you'd be able to play them in better forms today by just emulating the arcade versions. And so playing this, kind of 8-bit version of Berserk, it's cool, but it's not you could just be playing real Berserk at this point. And so you're kind of left with, once you remove those games, you kind of get down to the games that were, I don't know, a little more, not necessarily exclusive to the system, but not arcade ports, rather, So it has like 7 Cities of Gold on it, which I had completely forgotten about, but is a kind of pre-Sid Meier's Pirates kind of boat game. And, you're kind of going from port to port and exploring and stuff. It's cool. It has Miner 2049er, which is probably the most important game they could have. It does not have the follow-up Bounty Bob Strikes Back, which is a shame, but it does have Miner 2049er, which is a great platformer. It is a game in the Jeff Gerstmann Hall of Fame. Mule is on here. This is the version of Mule I played. It has Star Raiders 2 and not Star Raiders 1. And so this platform, I think, is probably known by most people as this is where Star Raiders was from. And they ported it around. There was a 5200 version, I believe, and then there was an Atari 2600 version that was like funky. But also Star Raiders required you to have a keyboard. You needed to turn shields on. You needed, a one-button joystick is not going to get it done. And so you needed to be able to turn on shields and get your aft view and set your throttle with the number keys and all of that sort of stuff. And this is not a functional. This tiny keyboard is not functional. It's USB. It's got all these USB ports, so you could presumably you'll be able to plug a USB keyboard into it should you need one. But it was a computer game. It was not something that you could just play with a controller. Star Raiders 2 is much more stripped down. It's a different game. I don't care for it. I kind of never did, but it is not Star Raiders 1, which is probably that's probably actually the most important game you could have as a part of this collection. I get why it's not here. This is not a functional keyboard. I mean, hey, if we're talking about the Atari 400, this membrane keyboard on the original was barely functional, to be honest. Oh man, I think about typing in programs from magazines and stuff like that, and just how much my fingers would hurt after hours and hours of typing on that membrane keyboard, that little piece of shit. And so upgrading from the 400 to the 800 was like day and night. I was like, oh, this has a full keyboard. I'm a fancy boy now. This is glorious. It also has on it a game called Lee, which at first I was like, I don't know what this is. And then you launch it, and it's like, oh, it's Bruce Lee, but they don't want to license the Bruce Lee name. So they have like modified the ROM and given it this kind of new box art and all of this stuff for it to just be called Lee. And that's a pretty good version of the game. I mean, whatever. That, you know, it's basically all they had to do was change the title screen where it says Bruce Lee and just change it to just say Lee. So it's the same game. It's not a meaningful difference. I think it's kind of funny, honestly, that it exists that way. But Bruce Lee is a classic, an all-timer for sure. So that's a great inclusion as well. There's some other stuff here like Wavy Navy and O'Reilly's Mind that I'm like loosely familiar with, but weren't necessarily games I played as a kid. It's got Asteroids, Basketball, Battlezone, Berserk, Boulder Dash. Well, Boulder Dash is not an Atari game, but Boulder Dash is another great classic kind of underground digging game. Not necessarily in the vein of like a Dig Dug. Though playing Boulder Dash made me think that some of the emulation, some of the sound quality might not be fully accurate, because Boulder Dash has some crazy little sounds in it, and they didn't sound crazy in the right way when I was playing it on this thing. I'd have to do some more direct comparison. Jeff Minter's Hover Bover. Hoover Bover is here as well. We just played that as part of the Llamasoft collection. Yeah, I don't know. It's a decent collection of 25 games with some basic features, like the other devices that RetroGames.biz has produced. This does have modes where you can kind of just load up regular. Well, I shouldn't say it does. I think it will. I don't think it does currently. I think it needs a firmware update. I suspect that the like launch firmware, or if this device has like pre-release firmware on it or whatever, I don't think it has that functionality right now. I was not able to look at a final version of the full manual, and I did see a draft version of the final manual, and it had the stuff in there for like, hey, here's how you add games to it, but it just says like, get a properly formatted USB drive. And I'm like, okay, properly formatted how exactly? Are we talking FAT32? I'm going to assume you're talking FAT32. And you know, not like NTFS or something like that. So maybe I need to reformat this just to make sure. They sent a USB stick with it, and I thought like, well, clearly it would be the right format for it, but I haven't actually checked. And when I stick it in the back of the thing, nothing happens. So what is supposed to happen is it's supposed to open up another menu item and let you load basically the same dumps that all the Atari emulators load up onto this thing. So you could theoretically use this to play any of the games for the 400 or 800. And presumably you could also plug in a USB keyboard, and if you needed a keyboard, you could use that. It has an on-screen keyboard that you would not want to use, but it does exist just in case. And so I would say, looking at the instructions and looking at the other stuff that this company has made, the Commodore 64 that they made as well, this is right in line with that, which is pretty good. You know, the Commodore 64 threw a couple of firmware updates, and they did an Amiga one as well. It got like a bunch of updates that are highly specific to like, okay, if you need to load this game and you need to have the joystick on port 2, you can create this text file and put it in the same directory as your game file, and it will load that, and it will know to do this. And so it was highly configurable in a way that was like not worth the effort. When you're just like, oh, I could just, you know, if I wanted to run Commodore 64 games in an emulator, I have 5 of those installed on the machine in front of me. So we'll see what the kind of full kind of add your own games experience is for the 400 Mini. I suspect it'll be fine. They don't have as many. The 400 probably doesn't have as many weird variables and options as a Commodore does. You'll want to occasionally force PAL or force NTSC with certain games, I'm guessing, but generally speaking, it's a little bit more easygoing than the C64. I don't know, man. Just as a shelf curiosity, this is just a beautiful little thing. And I love this thing. It's a tiny Atari 400. I should go get my real actual Atari 400 and just hook that up one of these days. But yeah, it's just a neat looking little device, and it's crazy to think that this was, this is a miniaturized version of the first computer I ever owned. That we got to this point, that video games got to this point all these decades later, that we're reissuing the Commodore 64 in tiny format and the NES Classic and some of this stuff. Not that this is, that's been going on for years. If anything, it feels like that era is a little bit over, right? The era of the mini console. People still like to dream about it. They're like, oh, a Dreamcast. What if they did a mini Dreamcast? Like stuff that's like probably still a little too difficult to just miniaturize and emulate well enough. For a low enough price and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously, I think, was it the current Raspberry Pi? Is it are they up to 5 now, or is it still just 4? Anyway, I know there was a relatively recent iteration on the Raspberry Pi that was that the 5 is like a little weirder than the 4 in some ways, and so it wasn't as immediately supported. But I haven't seen any good like emulation tests on the current on that Raspberry, on that Pi 5 to see where they're at with a lot of stuff. But I imagine, the 4, like there were a lot of people that were happy with, I want to say they were happy with like PlayStation game performance on like a Pi 3 or 4. So all that stuff's getting there. So presumably you eventually get to a point where it's like, yeah, you could do a Dreamcast, but like, I don't know. Flycast is right there, and it's really great. If you want to play Dreamcast games on not a Dreamcast, there are a lot of great. There is one great option for that, and it plays Naomi games and Adamus Wave games and all that sort of stuff as well. But yeah, this is out at the end of this week. So like it's out like Thursday. It's out a couple days from now, and yeah, I don't know if you're. I'd say if you still feel like a great deal of nostalgia for this specific machine or this specific era of Atari, this thing's cool, man. It's not Altera, which is an amazing. Like frequently updated emulator for this series of devices, from the person who made Virtual Dub of all things. But yeah, it's fucking cool, man. I feel like I don't need to plug this in to get the enjoyment out of it. That your mileage may vary. But I just kind of dig looking at this thing. I'm just going, yeah. Anyway, I've been messing with that. I've also been messing with Dragon's Dogma 2. The sequel to Dragon's Dogma. Runs like shit, man. I've been playing on the PC, and there are parts of that game once you get to the main town and you're running around town that are just like god damn. They have since they put out an image onto Twitter yesterday that was like, we're working on it. But here they put out an image saying, here's the stuff we're working on, and then alongside that they said, hey, this is not the patch that's going to improve the frame rate. That one's coming later. So, they're working on some changes for the console version. So I guess you can turn off ray tracing in hopes of getting better performance. They're going to cap the frame rate optionally. They're going to let you cap it at 30, which might prove to be better than their kind of uncapped experience on those. I have not seen the console versions of the game, so I don't know. I don't know what the exact story is there, but on PC, this is I have a 4090 and I have a 5950X as a CPU, And yeah, it's you get into these towns and you're just like, holy smokes, this runs bad. A modder put out a DLL that you can drop into your Steam directory that I guess turns on their kind of half-finished version of the DLSS 3 implementation. And some people have reported crashes with that. I did it, and it runs quite better. I have not experienced any crashes with it yet. You might want to seek that out. But it's it's a weird mod for the game that will improve the frame rate a bit. And yeah, I don't know. That aside, like, I think the game is pretty awesome. I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is quite enjoyable. I am having a really good time with it. It's not, like, it's once every few years I will just get hooked on a game that does all the things that I kind of, generally speaking, don't really like in games. This game is not friendly to you, the player. This game is not going out of its way to make it an easy or good time for you in some respects. They've modernized some aspects of it over its predecessor. But at the end of the day, it's a game with one save slot and a lot of hard choices and situations that you can get into where you're just kind of like, holy, I wish I could roll this back. But you're like, oh boy, okay, now I'm sort of stuck with this. But like the push and pull of being stuck with that kind of is that game. And so one of the things they mentioned in the things they're patching is like, oh, well, we're going to add a way for you to start a new game because we didn't put that in there. But I think that it feels like there's sort of a density to it where it just feels like there's more to see and do right off the bat than there is in the first game. They kind of throw you into the action. But like it's not a game with a bunch of on-screen icons pointing you in a direction. It's not a game like and it could be, and I don't know that would necessarily sacrifice too many of the things I like about the game. But instead of having a system where they just draw a line on the ground and say, run, if you want to go do this quest, run out, this is the exit out of town. Run this way, run along this road, run and do this, and then you'll get there. They don't do that. They don't put you can pull up your map and you can look at it. You can look at your mini map and you can see like, oh, okay, I'm running in the right basic direction. Instead, what they do is they have the pawn system, and they're much more upfront about the pawns and the nature of the pawns, and they're from beyond the rift, and I don't know, they work with other versions of you in other realms and all this other stuff, and so they traverse the realms, and you go to this stone, and you can call upon the pawns to be at your side. And so you create your main pawn, your bottom pawn, and then you can grab two more that other players have ostensibly created. And they will roll with you. And the cool thing about the pawns, and this was true in the first game, but I feel like it is maybe used to greater effect here. The pawns will learn. So as the pawns go out on their adventures and play the game with alongside other players, they will learn the lay of the land. They will learn like, oh, this is how this quest works. This is how you do this quest. And the pawns will know because they have done that quest before. And so I have a pawn who is an archer, and he is an annoying little dick. And whenever I select a quest as my, you select what's your selected quest in your quest log and all that sort of stuff, he will go, ooh, ooh, ooh. I know this one. Like literally will run out in front of you and wave his hand like, follow me, motherfucker. And then he will take off running in the direction of the quest. And so you just know to follow, like and you're encouraged for multiple reasons to ditch your pawns and get more. because the pawns that you take out of the rift don't level up. And so you'll always need to go back and get a higher level pawn. But also, you might have a situation where you're just like, none of these pawns know this quest. I need to try to find one that does, because I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. So they built this kind of hint system, this help system into the pawns. And again, this is stuff that they did in the first game. But I do feel like it's just done better here. It's a system that feels more fully realized, I guess I would say. And it also feels like something that, like, and maybe it's because I have played the first game and so I know what I'm in for, but it's also a situation where you're just like, okay, I know I need to find this pawn, I know I need to do this, and this will be the way I go. But sometimes that'll run you into some trouble. Like, I got, way out in the middle of nowhere on a quest, and we were out of camping gear, so there'll be fires around the world that you can camp at, and that will recharge your health. You can kind of only be out in the wilderness for so long, because as you take damage, your maximum health is drained. And so you're at a point where you're just like, oh boy, I can only heal up to a third of my maximum life. We need to camp. We need to find an inn or camp or something. And so that's kind of how it's almost like in a Persona dungeon like way, where you're just like, you're out of MP. You gotta punch out. Like, they kind of limit how much you can do that way before you have to return to an inn and do your thing to fully recharge. Like, they don't really have health items in the world that will like restore your maximum health. Maybe there's one there's one in there somewhere. But generally speaking, they really want you to occasionally stop and camp and cook some meat and then get up and go again. And so I'm out in the middle of nowhere. No more camping gear. No nearby town. And I have like something like a third or a quarter of my health left at this point. And I set and I have a quest to return to town to cash in what I did out there. So I select that. My archer goes like, I know how to get there. Follow me. This is like a shortcut, and he takes off running in a different direction than I used to get there. That happens to not be on the main road. And I'm like, cool, man. I don't like backtracking. Let's go. And we're running, and he's just like, he just bolts into this cave, and I'm like, oh shit, man, this is fucking so not. And we come out of the cave, and there's a fucking giant ogre there, surrounded by lizard dudes. And I'm like, well, I guess the other thing I do in this game is I don't run away from fucking fights. And I love the fights against big creatures in this game because it is so fucking ridiculous. And so he's just like running through there, and then suddenly we're just like in this massive fight, and I'm like, okay, we are not ready for this, but he got us into this mess, and my fucking daggers are gonna get us out of this mess. And I had to stab the shit out of everything there, and managed to pull it off. With only died once, and it felt fucking fantastic. You're like, yeah, fuck this. So to the point where, like, as we were running back, we eventually got back on the main road, and we're running, and then there's just a fucking giant cyclops chilling on the main road fighting a guard, and I'm like, okay, I guess we got to stab some more dudes. We've got to kill our way back to town. And so I climbed up on the back of this Cyclops and started stabbing him in the back of his fucking neck. And killed that motherfucker. And it's so good. That game is so good. Again, this is all stuff that the first game did. I think that they, it's a better looking game other than the performance stuff right now. That's obviously like an issue they need to figure out. But a lot of the same systems of leveling up, you can change class at any time. You also will unlock advanced classes along the way. And so you start out with stuff like Thief and Magic Dude and Archer, and they have pretty hard limits on what weapons you can equip when you're in a certain vocation. So as a thief, I have my twin daggers, I have light armor, and I have access to Skull Splitter, which is a jumping, spinning strike that is super fun to murder dudes with when you can land it, and it's not always the easiest thing to land. And then you know eventually you will unlock additional kind of advanced vocations that are just like, I'm a magic user with a spear. Or I have not strayed from thief yet. And then also, like, sometimes there'll be things around the world that if your pawns have seen them before, it'll be like, oh, master, in my Arisen, there's I know that there's a rift stone over here. And so, like, even just like little things in the world that aren't necessarily quest destinations, they'll see collectible, you know, materials. They'll see that stuff and call it out. Sometimes they'll just pick it up themselves. They'll point you over towards rift stones and other things in the world that you maybe have missed. And you have some kind of limited control where you can say, okay, yes, let's go do that to the pawn, basically, and say, yes, you go on ahead and I will follow you. I think that stuff's great. I think it's again, this is something that, you know, a lot of the first game did a lot of this stuff, but that's not to say that the first game was so massively influential that it became the way things are. And so a lot of the things that Dragon's Dogma 2 does still end up feeling fresh by comparison, you know, because the rest of the genre doesn't do it this way. And so having this kind of open world game that really is more about you navigating the world and not following a line on a map or whatever, ends up like, I think it's really fantastic. I think it's really fantastic. And it's not a game, you know, there are going to be, you know, much like the first game, I think there will be plenty of people that really don't like the game. I think there will be plenty of people that, just the friction of the game, the way that the game pushes back against you. Some of that stuff can be frustrating. You can run into some heartbreaking moments. The save system hasn't really gotten much better, and so it's a game where you really need to stop and manually save pretty frequently, because you never know what's around the next corner. And if you forget, then you're just kind of left to your last checkpoint. And sometimes that's fine and sometimes that's not. Generally speaking, I'll say it's been fine. I ran into way more issues in the first game involving like bad checkpoints than I have so far here. It feels like it's checkpointed me right before a big fight, or right on the, you know, the third of the way in the cave or whatever. But also, you know, it's a game with no manual save option, and it's a game with only one save slot and all that sort of stuff. And so it's certainly possible that and I have not run into this, but I could easily see a scenario where you have found yourself in a spot where your save is bad and you don't want to load that save anymore. It does have the option to then load from the last time you were at an inn, but depending on what you're doing, that could be hours ago. So those are all considerations. Yeah, I think it is. I think it is something special. And I do think that it's something that some people are going to really not like, because of how abrasive those sorts of things can be. And not everyone is going to be willing to go on that ride. So I'd say, you know, you kind of have to know whether you want to go on that ride or not. That's basically what I would say when it comes to like recommending Dragon's Dogma 2. Also, their performance is still all over the place. Some of the reactions, so that's the stuff that's interesting about the game. There's been a lot of like kind of uninteresting discussion about microtransactions for for this, which I find a little like I don't know, like it feels. Some of the discussion feels like a little disingenuous because it feels like it's coming from people who have not played enough of the game to know why this doesn't matter, or they're just not playing the game and they're looking at the stuff on Steam and going, because it's the same type of stuff that they sold for Resident Evil 4. Like, Capcom has done this for a single player game before. In Resident Evil 4, if you go to the Steam page for that, you could go buy like free weapon unlocks. Basically, you could spend money for like weapon upgrades and all that sort of stuff. It's like it's weird DLC. It's shitty, you know. Like I'm not sitting here going like, oh, what great stuff, but like this, it feels like it has it feels like it has the same type of the same type of mentality that when EA put out that Tiger Woods game and they said, do you just want to buy an overall 99 custom golfer? You can. Like, it feels like that type of microtransaction. So if you go to I'll go look here, because it's like, it's items, many of which you can find in the game, and stuff that you very much don't need. Like, you can buy wake stones, which wake stones can be used to bring dead characters, dead people, dead villagers back to life. You will find wake stone shards all over the world, and every time you get 3 of them, you get a wake stone. It's not to say that they are plentiful, but like, you could buy one for 99 cents if you wanted to. You can also buy rift crystals when you summon a pawn. It costs RC. You get a lot of RC just from playing the game. I've never, unless you're swapping pawns all the time, or you really, really, really want a special pawn, which those can get more expensive. Like, you can give them $2.99 and they will give you 1,500 rift crystals. I would say that is a fucking ripoff. And it's not something you need, but also it's not something you need. It feels like a time saver. It feels like when WWE sells a thing and their expensive versions of the game always come with this. It's do you just want to unlock everything? Do you want to unlock all the wrestlers? Because you can just do that with this version of the game. Or if you want, you can go buy the Supercharger DLC out of the Steam store for like $20 or whatever the fuck it is, to unlock everything without having to play through all the modes. And so it's just sort of a weird, I don't know. This just kind of feels like there are people out there that are running businesses based on them putting out videos about being mad about shit. Stop me if you've heard this one before. And so they are leaning into that on this particular topic because the game is new and hot. And I guess, like, I would back up and say, like, I don't think this stuff is great. I don't think this stuff needs to exist. I think it's like a little frustrating sometimes when games do have this kind of shortcut DLC type stuff. But I there's a lot of people that are also taking this and being like, well, this game it's another example of pay to win, or or whatever else. And that's not the case. This again, this is not new. Capcom themselves have done this on multiple games in the past. It's a very weird thing for people to suddenly be very up in arms about. It just, some line intersected on some Google Trends, YouTube trending topic thing, and everyone decided, like, oh, we can we can make videos about this, and we're mad about all these. They're taking our video games away from us, or like what it just ties into some other larger, dumber fucking narrative. And I don't know. Like it's hard to feel a level of outrage about a thing that's been happening for 15 years this way. It's a weird thing to get mad about now, I guess I would say. So yeah, there are like better things to, like, if you want to get mad about add-on content and that sort of stuff, get mad that they sold you the real ending to Asura's Wrath, when as DLC, that the new game plus for Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth was something that they charged extra for. Like, that I think is a reasonable thing to look at and go like, this sucks. Like, this is a clear example of like, this stuff should be in the game. But for a company to come along and say like, what if we sell some shit for people? No one finishes games anymore anyway. So what if we allow people to give us $5 for this currency that they don't really need, so that they can hire a higher level pawn if they want to? Like, look, man, if you feel like you are owed these rift crystals or whatever else, Cheat Engine is right there. You don't need to go down this road if that's something that you care about deeply. There are plenty of ways around all of that stuff that also, from a feel good. So I'll tell you a thing I did. I'll tell you a thing I did over the weekend as well. I installed BlueStacks, which is an Android emulator. And it is, some people play Android games on their PC this way. There is some Android stuff built into Windows 11 these days, but they're in the process of discontinuing it, I guess, because they don't support it or whatever. BlueStacks is a weird thing. It has a very checkered past. But I found myself curious about cheating in phone games. And so I downloaded a game that I've had it on my iPhone for a little bit now, and I poke away at it here and there, and I'm like, gosh, this thing sucks. This is a poorly made product. It's a bad thing, and and it is a game called AEW Rise to the Top. It's an idle game, a clicker game based on AEW, All Elite Wrestling. And I've had that installed on my phone for a little bit, and it is incredibly poorly made. It is a piece of shit. As far as mobile idle games go, it is absolute garbage. And it's from a company that makes like a ton of these. I've talked about it before, because they made the Trailer Park Boys idle game and the one based on The Office and all of this other stuff. And so it's a really shitty idle game that happens to have loose ties to AEW wrestling in it, insofar as you are getting cards of wrestlers and leveling them up and all this other stuff. So I was like, I wonder if you can just cheat in this stuff. And I looked it up, and sure enough, running it on PC and running Cheat Engine, you can kind of do it. And I'm like, well, I don't give a fuck if I get banned from. I mean, I should get, like whatever. I don't care. Like, ban me from the game. I'm not gonna. Like, it does have an element of leaderboards and PvP, and I'm not looking to exploit that stuff. I don't want to mess up anyone else's good time. So I used Cheat Engine to give myself an exponentially high number of the paid currency that I can't even tell you what the number was. It was so fucking high. And then you can just buy time skips, and you can level up all the wrestlers and just sit there and click it over and over again to level everything up to the top level. And I broke the game. I leveled everything up. Like, so it'll have goals in game that'll be like, in order to move to the next level, you need to level up 4 of your characters. And I'm like, cool, man. Oh, wait, I've already hit max level with all my characters, and I can't level anyone else up. And so it had a goal there that said, you've done 0 of 0 of these. And it was just like, oh, I have wailed too hard in this game. I wailed out too fucking high. And completely broke the game, and I'm like, awesome. And then I turned it off, and that was that. And now I'm never going to play it on my phone again either, because I've seen the later things in there, and I'm like, this is all terrible. This is all fucking terrible. As much as I want to have a level 11 Evil Uno card, this is dumb. This is a bad product. And so it freed me from that particular curse. And that's how I play a lot of idle games, is I'll poke at them for a while and then be like, let's cheat engine the shit out of this and break it. And then I will max out the numbers, and I'll go, okay, all right. And then I will uninstall it. Like a lot of the stuff that's on Steam, I will do it the same way. I'm currently doing it in a game called, what is it called? Unnamed Space Idle, which is decent. It's a decent little idle game with a lot of mechanics in it. And I'm like, cool, yeah, I'm gonna completely break this and then see what happens. So I don't know. That is, obviously games are going to have anti-cheat and that sort of stuff. And there is something like that in Dragon's Dogma 2, because the pawns do get shared online. And so they probably don't want you to, I think in the first game, they would like ban your pawn or something from making its way into other games, which has its downsides for sure. But I don't know. Generally speaking, my advice for a lot of that currency sort of stuff, which again, some games are protected against it. I'm not saying go and steal skins in Tekken 8 or anything like that. Though I ain't your fucking dad, and whatever. But in single player games, it's a victimless crime. Cheat engine is fun to fuck around with, and give it a look. Can you use cheat engine on PS5 or Xbox is the question. No, it is a PC application. Though I think there is an Android version of it that will run natively on phones if you wanted to go down that road. I'm not super familiar with that, but it is a PC application. And it's fun. It's fun to poke at games, especially when you're done with them. I'm not advocating like go ruin every game experience for you. But for games where you're done, where you're basically just like, I think I'm going to bail out on this. What if instead you just had infinite health and just ran through the rest of it and went, ha 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 ha, or picked it apart and you're like, I want to see how this system works and fuck around with the numbers a little bit to see what happens. And I can kind of learn a little bit more about maybe how some of these games were made that way by breaking some of these systems wide open. And that can be fun to just fuck around with. So yeah, I don't know. I recommend that. But yeah, again, I think by and large, I think microtransactions in a single player game are kind of gross anyway, because generally when we're talking about skins and we're talking about gun blueprints, it's like flashy shit to show off to other players, which, I don't like, who cares? But it is generally like, look at me, I'm Snoop Dogg. And I'm going to make all the other players hear Snoop Dogg say shit when I run around the level and throw grenades and stuff. Like that's a microtransaction that I can kind of go like, okay, yeah. But these days when it's just like, do you want a fucking better sword? Like they're all kind of cheats at the end of the day. Like even a lot of the deluxe edition stuff you'll get in big single player games. Traditionally, it's been like, hey, here's this armor looks like an Xbox when you put it on, and that's fun for us, but also it has more inventory slots than you would have this early in the game otherwise. Or, hey, here's a sword that's going to be like better than any sword you'll find for the first 4 hours of the game. You'll eventually find way better swords, but it's just a little starter to get you going with a little boost. And so developers are perfectly willing to kind of break some of their own progression and break some of their own power ramp for the sake of a deluxe edition or for the sake of a DLC or whatever else. And so, like, at that point, I holding a lot of that stuff sacrosanct and holding it as like, this is the way it's meant to be and you're playing wrong. Just have fun. Just have fun with video games. If the way for you to have fun with video games is to cheat it so that you have infinite stamina so that you can creeble on a Cyclops for 3 hours straight and just laugh maniacally, I would say fucking go for it. I did a little bit of cheating in Dragon's Dogma 1 at that point. Like I reached a point with it where I'm like, oh, well, what if, and because that wasn't even cheat engine stuff. There are just mods available. You're just like, hey man, do you want to just have infinite stamina? And I'm like, oh yeah, that might be kind of cool. And so I messed around with it for a little bit. I'm like, okay, yeah, I like, this breaks the game. This trivializes a lot of the combat, and I see why like, it helps you understand why the stamina system is in place. Because you see it and you go like, oh, okay, yeah, this is actually maybe a little too fucked up like this. But I like doing that with games that I'm done with. Like that's not where I'm at with Dragon's Dogma 2, and I intend to play it as normal. But if 9 other games come out and I feel like I'm dragging my feet on Dragon's Dogma 2, but I still want to see it or whatever, I might be open to it, a month from now, 2 months from now, or something like that. I might go and do that and just fuck around. You know what I really had fun doing with Cheat Engine was playing Persona 4. Because I had watched someone play through Persona 4 the right way, and I had also played through Persona 4 the right way. And so at that point, I had seen like a lot of Persona 4. But also I was like, what happens if you just beat every dungeon the first day it's available? And you have all of this extra time to work on your hot S links. Like, you can kind of break the game in some ways there. And so that was really engaging and interesting to fuck around with, where you're just like, I'm going to give these characters infinite hit points and infinite MP, and then I'm going to stomp through this dungeon and murder everybody. And you're like, this is great. Fuck all these guys. And then you kind of get to, like, okay, like, now let's really poke at these other systems. Let's really kind of mess around here and see. Yeah, and then Persona 4 Golden had, it had the whole easy mode and a lot of stuff that, they remade the game and kind of found ways to kind of break their own stuff a little bit. But like, that was a really fun way to play Persona. I played the PS2 version emulated on a PC to do that stuff. I played Final Fantasy X. I played a lot of it that way. After watching my wife play it, I was like, what happens if you just what happens if you just really fucking go nuts and fill out the entire sphere grid? What if you just have everything on all these characters? Like, how broken is it? Like, how broken does it get? And the answer is pretty fucking broken. And sometimes it's fun to just break a game and be like, look at how powerful this is. Way more powerful than a character is reasonably ever supposed to fucking get. And I don't know. I think that stuff's neat. I think that stuff's fun to just poke around at, just in the interest of just like learning more about some of the games I was going to say like, but Final Fantasy X is not a game I like by a long shot. Another game I will presumably cheat in sooner rather than later is Horizon Forbidden West Complete Edition. This just came out on PC. It is the second Horizon. It is the second game in the Horizon series. Aloy is back and she's gonna fuck up the evil AI, I guess. I played through about 2/3 of this, what felt like all of this game on PlayStation 5, but turns out there was way more of it left than I even thought. So maybe I played through half of it. I don't know. I played through enough of it to where I'm like, okay, I think I see that where the story is going here, and I'm not a big fan. And And then I kind of dropped it on PlayStation because it got to be repetitive. It got to be a little tedious. Like now that some more time has passed and all that stuff, I am finding Horizon Forbidden West to be much more agreeable. It's an awesome game. But I felt the first game didn't need a sequel. Like, I feel like the ending in that first game was so solid. That first game was awesome. And this game, when you're just all the looting you have to do and just all the weapons and upgrades and this and that, like, there's just a little too much of that shit. So by the end of it, it just felt like, or not even by the end of it, but like by the point I dropped it, I was just like, gosh, I just don't want to do any more of this stuff. And so I fell away from it pretty hard. After, like I was mostly digging it, even though from a story perspective, it felt like the first game was a great place to leave it off. But yeah, it's back on PC. I think that it's tremendous. It looks great. It's always nice when a PC game fully supports the DualSense. You forget about it sometimes. And, I've had a DualSense hooked up here for a while now. And then you feel that rumble again for the first time in a while from a good first party Sony game that really goes all out and uses every part of the controller. And you're like, gosh, this is great. This feels awesome. I wish more games would devote more time to really good rumble, because when it's used well, it's like, this is crazy. It's crazy how good this is. And this is a really great port of the game, as far as I can tell. Maybe your experience will be different depending on what kind of PC you have. That's always the fun part about this. But for me, runs outstandingly well. Plays as you'd expect. I mean, I'm using a PlayStation controller, so I'm expecting it to be the same. I can't tell you anything about the mouse and keyboard controls because I don't think that you should play this game with a mouse and keyboard. But it's a very, very nice looking game, and it is a lot of fun to play. It's actually, it is nice to return to the world of Horizon now that there's been some time since but also I have a save that's 2/3 of the way through on PlayStation 5. So should I just go back and play that? The answer, probably not. So what I'm thinking of doing is like, I'm going to mess with this some more, and just like, it has a ton of accessibility features you can turn on to kind of lessen some of the impact of some of its systems. And I might just have a fun cruise through that game and just be like, fuck it, man. I'm just going to have a good time. Or yeah, you could cheat and have infinite arrows and you could probably make your staff one hit kill if you wanted to. That's maybe a little extreme, but I don't know. That's another game. Be right for, if you wanted to cheat in some video games, man. Woo! That could be fun. I don't know. And I assume that they, because I remember that was something that was like a problem, or the people were mad about when the game first came out, was that Aloy just never shut the fuck up and was always just telling you the answer to a puzzle as you're about to look at it and solve it yourself. And so I assume that they maybe made some adjustments there, or added some adjustable sliders for you there if you so desire. But that was something that was just like, yeah, this is a bit much. God of War was kind of that way for me too, though. I don't know. Like that's not, to me, that doesn't feel like a Horizon specific thing. In some ways, that feels like a first party Sony kind of thing in some ways. But yeah, that game is out. It looks fantastic, and yeah, good time up to a point. and then suddenly I was not having a good time with it anymore. But hey, also out now is Call of Duty Warzone Mobile. They already had Call of Duty on your phone, but now this is Call of Duty on your phone. And so you can play a Warzone I messed with this just the littlest bit. This feels like it is going to end up being one of those age gap things for me. This is going to be one of those like, you damn kids sorts of situations where I don't want to play a game like this on my phone. I don't want to play it with a touch screen, like approximating dual analog inputs. I don't want to play a game where like the options are either make it so you fire automatically or you can fire manually, but you're playing on a phone, so the screen is pretty small, so lining up headshots is a much different prospect than it is everywhere else in the world of Call of Duty. I tethered a PlayStation controller to my phone and played it that way, and it's like it's all perfectly doable. Like you can absolutely fucking do the shit out of that shit. You can use some Call of Duty on your phone. And it looks like that for as much as they're calling it Call of Duty Warzone, it does sure look like you unlock a traditional multiplayer map in there somewhere on the like game mode list. So I don't know. Like it ties your progression in from main Call of Duty. So like, you know, like I'm already level 80 something or whatever it is. And I played through the first few matches, which is, you know, for a modern battle royale these days means like I played through the matches where you are definitely just playing against bots. And so I won my first 2 Warzone matches. I won them both. I'm the best there ever lived at this game. I'm amazing and incredible. And oh my God. And then I unlocked all the full menus and looked around at what was there. And I was like, I don't. Like they created a system where you are earning a currency for doing your dailies and stuff like that, and you use that to unlock weapons and stuff from the main console and PC Call of Duty. Like your full inventory and loadouts don't just come in automatically. They want you to kind of re-earn that shit on mobile. So it's not like it's fully tying your, you know, it's not, you don't just attach your account and load it up and it's the same experience that you get on PC, because Warzone is free everywhere. It's free on console. It's free on, it's free on PC. But this phone thing is like just different enough, I guess, to where they monetize it separately. But it does bring in like your unlocked people. And so I was able to play as Snoop Doggy Dogg on my telephone for whatever that's worth. I don't know, but the way these games control on phones is that like it kills me. Like I just so don't want to do any of that. And so the very idea of I got some time to kill, I'm gonna load up Call of Duty on my phone and and then now I'm running around with my touchscreen, and like the imprecision of it, or just the general kind of shitty way it feels compared to a great controller. Is enough to make me that's just not something that I want to interface with the way I like video games and the way I play video games, you know? And so I assume that's something that's very much an age gap sort of thing, right? Because, you know, kids are going to have phones and they're probably used to playing something on, I mean, I was going to say Fortnite, but I guess not lately. Everyone I know that has like kids that are like Fortnite aged, they all play it on Switch. It's not a phone game. Well, I guess it can't be a phone game to them right now, but it's always something that they play it on Switch. But yeah, I don't, you know, and I'm not going to keep a PlayStation control. I'm not gonna I gotta prop my phone up against the wall here, and then I'm gonna hold my controller. I'm not gonna, you know, I could go get a backbone controller and bolt my phone into it and do all of that stuff. And that's not something I'm going to just like whip out. I don't go enough places to ever need to whip it out really. But anyway, that thing's available. It seems totally fine, but you know, and it runs well enough. And though it does a funny thing where all of the loading messages say the more you play it, the better it looks, which is like a conceptually insane sentence. But what they mean is it is streaming down higher quality assets as you play the game and caching it on the device. And so quite literally, you can download it all up front, which is what I ended up doing. But it's that didn't change the message from saying anything else. It still keeps saying like, the more you play it, the better it looks. I'm like, yeah, because you get used to looking at this fucking thing. And you're like, it looks okay, but it doesn't, guess what? The PC version of it looks better. Like, surprise, surprise. Like, it's like, oh, this is a really kind of crummy looking version of Snoop Dogg, but okay. I see what you were going for there. The more you play it, the better it looks. It just sounds so insidious on its own. But really, they're just like, they're just caching. They're caching higher quality assets as you play the game. But it's just, it sounds really almost creepy. I don't know. And I don't know. I installed it because it just seems like one of those things that they're going to be like, if you install this, we'll give you a bunch of shit for the main Call of Duty. I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably just download that and launch it and see what happens. And so I did that, and I don't see myself really sticking with it. Not because it's a bad game, but because I don't want to play that kind of game on a phone. Like, at the end of the day, when we talk about all of the other stuff, and Apple's going to go through its lawsuits here, and the monopoly stuff, and in the EU they're going to allow alternate storefronts, and eventually Microsoft will presumably put out a Game Pass app of some kind, and you'll be able to more easily play those games on an iPhone than you could before, and obviously you can already play them on an Android device, and I think it's just like, I don't think I want to play this stuff on a screen that small. I mean, if I had to, if the option is play games like that or don't play games, you got me. But yeah, I don't really think that's a thing that I want to go out of my way to do a lot of. Why don't we move on? And we'll get into the news here. I'll push this button to signify the news is here. The Game Developers Conference took place in San Francisco. And as I said at the top of the show, not necessarily a ton of like forward-facing information out of that thing. Not a lot of like, here's massive announcements for upcoming games or whatever else. But like, there's been a lot of doom and gloom in the video game business lately. Stop me if you've heard this one before. And so I think like a lot of people were going into GDC thinking like, oh man, the funding situation is really bad. There's just, everyone is getting laid off. Like what's going on? But like, it seems that I've seen a handful of people who were there say that the vibe was relatively positive, that there is a lot of bad stuff happening, but like there's money out there that you can find it. There's funding out there. There are still deals being signed. It's not completely closed up. There's not completely shut off. And so there is still some things happening. I think probably one of the two bits of info out of the show that I found interesting, one of which came from gamesindustry.biz. Chris Dring, who's the head of the site, was out there in San Francisco, taking some meetings and doing some things and all that sort of stuff. And he came back and did a little podcast for GI.biz, kind of talking about some of his experience there. I say little because it's a half hour long. I don't mean that to sound like, they're little and I mean to say, if a podcast is under 3 hours, it's what are we even doing? Is it even a podcast at that point? Jesus. And he got back and had some things to say about Xbox. And so I guess I'll frame this up a little bit as saying one of the fun things about going to GDC and talking to people that are at developers and people at publishers is having relatively loose conversations about a wide variety of topics, the state of the industry, all the way down to like a person's individual project. Like, you find out a lot of stuff by just being there to talk to people. This is how the PlayStation 4 Pro specs leaked out, right? Is Kotaku had a story based on like they were in line next to two developers who were talking about it, and that was the supposedly the source for their story. Right around the same time that docs from the developer portal leaked, much like they just did recently from the PS5 Pro, and it's GDC time again. So hey, surprise, surprise, that we're doing it this way again. And so there's just a lot of like loose talk that you can have, because you're not calling someone up on their desk phone and leaving an imprint of like leaving a caller ID of like, why this reporter call you? Why'd you talk to this reporter for 45 minutes on your desk phone? Which no one uses their desk phone anymore. Nobody has a desk anymore. They all work from home. So it's a sort of a different sort of thing. But that was always like you get people in person, you are hanging out at a bar and having conversations with them about, this is like, I had conversations about Half-Life 3 in this sort of way, and all of that shit. So Chris Dring from gamesindustry.biz came back, had some conversations with people about the Xbox. And, you think about this as like, it is, we have recent PlayStation news around the Pro and all this sort of stuff. And we had all the recent Xbox kind of hand wringing around the state of the platform and the Xbox's future and all of this sort of stuff, to the point where Xbox leadership had to get up in front of people and say like, yeah, we're bringing some games to PlayStation. It's not that big of a deal. It's not something we're looking to do all the time, but also like they didn't say no to any individual game. It was more like, right now we are not looking at that. So I'm going to read, this is a transcript kind of pulled from it. It is called the GI Microcast on GDC 2024, PS5 Pro and more. You can go listen to the full half hour or so over at gamesindustry.biz, or presumably wherever podcasts go. But in the kind of context of Xbox, Dring had this to say: with Xbox, I've heard from a very prominent company and one not so prominent that Xbox's performance in Europe is flatlining. You can follow our monthly coverage in the games market, and you can see Xbox's sales are falling, and it fell all throughout last year, and it's falling even harder this year. The major company who released a big game last year said they don't know why they bother supporting it being the Xbox. We mentioned in a previous podcast that retailers are considering or have began cutting back Xbox stock on their shelves, hardware and games. And now you've got third-party publishers going, we're putting a lot of effort into creating an Xbox Series S and X version of a game, where, to be honest with you, the market for us is PC and PS5. So this is kind of an element of this story that didn't really come up last time. When we were talking about kind of the future of Xbox and the future of Game Pass and what does all of that really mean? We kind of talk about that in terms of like the Microsoft first party output, and are they going to go sign Game Pass deals? Are they going to go do this and that? And it's, again, this seems to be mostly focused on Europe and the United Kingdom. That's where they are based. In terms of just the overall sales of Xbox hardware and stuff like that, I think traditionally Europe has been a PlayStation stronghold. That was even when the Xbox 360 felt like it was the dominant platform for that generation. That wasn't nearly, I don't believe that was the case at all. And if it was a close battle in Europe and in the UK. Like, that has long been a PlayStation dominated part of the world. And so, the Xbox, I guess when we think about the Xbox brand and all of that stuff, in the United States, it's a much more favorable and favored brand here than I think it is just about anywhere else. So I guess like for context, right? Like the idea that like Xbox sales are not doing well in Europe, like that's not, like, yes. The Xbox brand has maybe fallen on some slightly harder times. And so, yes, that's going to continue, because even in the best of times with the Xbox 360, it didn't seem like that they were necessarily making a massive imprint in Europe. So I guess for context, think about that. But the other part of that there is, when we're talking about major third-party publishers, potentially, or just questioning why they're supporting the Xbox, right? Like that's kind of another advanced, that's another step beyond some of the other conversations we've been having about Xbox lately. If third-party publishers' faith in the platform is being shaken to the point where they're just like, hey, we're looking at the numbers on this thing, we're looking at the return on our investment, and we're just not seeing it on Xbox. Like, and granted, if they're already shipping on PC and PS5, the work to get it running on an Xbox is not, they're not developing a game from ground up. It's not a full-fledged port the way it would be if they were putting it on Switch or whatever else. But I don't want to say that it's like, oh, it's easy. You just load it in the engine and then click the Xbox button and submit it. Like it's never that, right? There's always, especially with the existence of an S and an X that they have to kind of tune for and whatever else, like real work goes into those versions of the games. It's not to say that they get a free pass or whatever. But if they're looking at it and going like, hey, even in the context of like, this is not necessarily full-fledged development of a new product, and they're still like, man, I don't know why we're supporting the Xbox. That's not great. If that is kind of the like scuttlebutt going around out of, again, this is out of like one or a couple of publishers. He says again here, we're talking about Christopher Dring's conversations that he had at GDC with publishers about the Xbox. And he is the head of gamesindustry.biz. He says they'd heard from a very prominent company and one not so prominent that the performance in Europe is flatlining. So again, like to contextualize some of that stuff, like, yeah, Europe is Europe and all that sort of stuff. But he goes on a little bit here and he says, and with Xbox putting some of the games on PS5, I understand the majority of them will be coming across at some point, assuming it progresses as Xbox believes it probably will. I think Xbox is in real trouble as a hardware manufacturer, and that was the thing that came out of GDC for me, because I've always been of the belief that it is the Game Pass delivery system. It's got a good UI, a good controller. If you like Xbox games, it's probably the best way to play them, and so on. I thought it would be fine, but then I didn't really factor in that some developers and publishers might just go, yeah, is there any point? And that's where you can lose it. So that's kind of the game. Yeah, the good UI is certainly debatable. That's where the conversation starts to take a weird turn, right? Because if we think about Game Pass, and if we think about the importance of Game Pass as it relates to the entire Xbox strategy, a lot of that relates to third-party games being, like Microsoft's first party is not putting out that many games all the time, right? They're doing their thing, and they'll, and they acquired some publisher. Obviously, like Diablo is coming this week, right? And they'll eventually roll Call of Duty out, presumably, and all of that. So like, but if the third-party games are not going to come to Xbox at all, then they can't come to Game Pass anymore either. And so if they're saying, hey, we're not seeing the sales out of this thing to the point where we wonder why we're doing it at all, that would then point to like, well, if you were on Game Pass, then you would get this amount of money and you would do this and that, and you would monetize in that way as well. And maybe that would make it make sense, but maybe not. Dring closes out the segment. They talk about a lot more than this on this podcast. It isn't just like 30 minutes of like, hey, the Xbox is doomed or whatever. I don't even necessarily take this as the Xbox is doomed, but it says, I was watching Michael Pachter's podcast and he was talking about how it's all about Game Pass for Xbox. Yet I've actually been hearing that Microsoft's been putting less focus on Game Pass. That's a weird one like that. And that's been up for debate online. There's been some other reporters that have kind of said like, well, no, we're hearing that they're going crazier onto like way further into Game Pass and additional subscription and service type content. To which I would then back up to the top of this bit here where he's talking about hearing from third parties. And wonder now, with all of that and trying to take all this in and try to figure out like what's really being said here in a kind of between the lines sort of way, if third-party publishers are getting the impression that Game Pass is not necessarily a focus, I might take that because it's very unlikely that any third party is going to have the full strategy, the full story on, hey, here's what we're doing with Game Pass for the next 3 years, 5 years, whatever else. It's very likely that they're going to have knowledge into their deals and maybe some other deals at other publishers that they caught wind of or whatever. But generally they're focused on like, hey, is Microsoft paying us a bunch of money to put this game? Like, are they making a pitch for us to put our game on Game Pass day one? Are they making pitches for our back catalog? What's that money look like? And it may be that those deals aren't, and I think we've heard at this point that some of the Game Pass deals are drying up a little bit compared to how they used to be over the years. And that also maybe the deals don't look as great as they used to based on some of the usage split out or maybe just the upfront fee or whatever it is. You know, every deal is going to be done a little differently there. And so I wonder if as a result of Microsoft acquiring Activision and acquiring that catalog and the amount of money they had to spend doing it, I wonder if both things are true. Like it's perfectly reasonable that Chris Dring would hear from third parties that, hey, maybe Game Pass is not the thing. And he doesn't necessarily cite his source, but it is in the context of him talking about sales in Europe and some of this other stuff. So if it's the same source for all this information, I guess I wouldn't be shocked that maybe individual publishers out there might be feeling like the Game Pass gravy train ain't what it used to be. And potentially that makes me start to wonder then if Microsoft then will continue to focus more and more on its first party offerings in Game Pass. Like when Call of Duty comes out this year, presumably it will launch day one on Game Pass, right? I mean, they still have to bring Modern Warfare 3 to the platform. It's not there, or to the service rather. It's not there yet. But if you have the biggest and one of the biggest games in the world coming to your subscription service, and you know, a handful of these other, you know, like Diablo is not small. Like it's been banged up a little bit. People seem to be responding well to the more recent announcements about the changes they're making to Diablo 4. Itemization and some of this other stuff, but I wonder if they're going to try to focus a little bit less on third party because they're going to go, well, we've got Call of Duty and we're going to build, and this is I'm just speculating here, but if we take what like Jez Corden is saying about, like, I hear that they're rolling out even more perks and services, combined with Dring hearing that maybe third parties are kind of getting a little bit of a cold shoulder from the service, that makes me wonder if they're going to be like, hey, Game Pass, you should play Call of Duty on it, and if you do, we're going to give you this many COD points per month or quarter. You're going to get these exclusive blueprint and skin packs as a Game Pass. You know, they already do the perks stuff. And third-party games are sometimes a part of that perk thing, but I wonder if they will attempt to maximize the impact of Call of Duty on that service and maximize their ability to turn Call of Duty into Game Pass subscribers by kind of finding different things they can bolt onto it to say, hey, you will get all this extra Call of Duty shit as a Game Pass subscriber as well. And that's the only way you can get it, is if you do it this way. And so I'm thinking that maybe that is the thing that they do, and that you know, as a result of doing that, then maybe they think like, well, we think this will turn into this many subscribers, and so as a result, we're not going to go spend a bunch of money on third-party games. We're instead going to focus on the stuff that we own and operate, and try to make the best out of that. And we'll still do third-party deals. We have to, obviously, but we're going to tighten that up a little bit, because it's always been a push and pull. My impression of the spending on Game Pass and the purchasing of day one exclusives for third-party games on Game Pass is that a lot of that has been necessitated by the first-party lineup not being where it needs to be. Like, oh shit, we had to delay Halo, or hey, this game isn't coming out in this window, or this game kind of bombed or whatever. So while we thought we could rely on that for kind of steady Game Pass stuff, these games all got pushed back. So we're going to take this money that we were earmarking for this quarter, and we're going to shove it at the Game Pass guys and go make some deals. Go get Outriders. Go, you know, or whatever. Go get games. And so if the first party stuff is starting to happen more, which I don't know that I believe that it is, but they bought more stuff, so there's theoretically more stuff to go around, that they would then naturally not spend as much money on the third party side. I don't know that they can afford to take their foot off the gas on either thing, to be honest, but that is the impression I've had, is that money has been funneled into Game Pass as a result of first party games going off the rails through the pandemic, you know, just like games getting delayed left and right and all this other stuff. Like, where's Fable? I don't know. Here, go get a third party something. Go get something. And so if they're going to try to get that back on the rails and try to get a real cadence for first party releasing and ongoing servicing for those games and so on, and tie all of that into Game Pass, then I would think that they would naturally kind of slow the flow of their third party deals. And we've been hearing about them, I feel like, slowing some of the third party deals for a bit now. So I guess I'm not surprised that this would be a talking point, or this would be something that a third party source would bring up, or in the context of their dealings with Xbox, right? So I don't know. That I guess is my take on it. Like, I don't necessarily know where that leads. It doesn't necessarily seem like a doom and gloom thing. He does also mention that that his understanding is that if things kind of keep going as they will, or as they are, that the majority of Xbox's first party games will eventually end up on other platforms. And so that's how you end up with like this self-fulfilling prophecy to a certain extent, right? If the third party stuff on Game Pass dries up and the sales aren't there to keep third parties from making the games in the first place, and they start to back away from the Xbox Series X as a device, or rather, I mean, you know, if Microsoft decides to back away from the Series X as a device and move forward as they have done in the past, maybe the third-party support situation on an Xbox changes, and maybe it ends up resembling some of the stuff, like, you know, when we complain about Japanese support, or you know, support from Japanese developers on the Xbox, and that's better than it was. They've got Persona games, and you know, they've got more than they had. In some ways, it feels like the Like a Dragon series has become a little more synonymous with Xbox as a result of some of the Game Pass stuff that's being done there. But you do start to wonder, like, worldwide, do developers start to question, like, hey, is it worth it for us to do an Xbox version of the game? You see indie developers make this call all the time, constantly, where they go, what are we launching on? We're launching on PC and Switch. And yeah, we'll get to the other platforms. Like, well, yeah, we'll get a PS5 version out as soon as we can. And then Xbox, yeah, we'll do, yeah, of course we'll do, yeah. And by the time they finally get to an Xbox version, it's been a year and they're launching on Game Pass or something like that. And they're like, I don't know, here you go. So Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's an interesting, it's an interesting tidbit of information. I think you kind of have to take it as such and kind of say like, well, yeah, it would make sense that a third party would maybe have this perspective on Game Pass and the direction it's going in. They're not going to know the full strategy, so we also can't take this and say this is definitely what's happening with the future of Xbox. But I think the writing's on the wall about a lot of this stuff. I think that it makes, as I've said numerous times at this point, I think it makes sense for most of Xbox's first party lineup to eventually make its way to other platforms. I think if they wait long enough, it won't even necessarily cannibalize some of the stuff they're trying to do with Game Pass. But we also spoke about Sean Layden and Peter Moore, kind of former leaders in the console space, talking about the idea of a next generation console and what does that look like and all of that sort of stuff. And I don't know, you could see a world where this does fall apart on the Xbox side of things, where developers maybe go like, hey, this partnership is not working for us anymore because we're just not seeing the sales here, and so we're gonna back away a little bit and go with PlayStation and PC, and then we'll evaluate whatever Nintendo is doing and make calls on that, case by case or whatever. And then what does that mean for a next generation console out of Xbox? They said they would have some hardware stuff later this year, and they're working on the most powerful leap in console history and all this other stuff. What does that even mean? And so, yeah, I don't know. This, it's very interesting, and I'm curious to see if there is just a full pivot out of Microsoft at some point down the line where they just go, okay, we've had enough. We've suffered enough in this space. There was an interview. Phil Spencer's been out there a number of times talking about how he thinks the portable form factor is really cool, and that Windows is a letdown there. He's right. It is. Windows 11 is not well suited for the Asus ROG Ally, the Lenovo Legion Go, like any of these existing devices. Like, Windows is not up to the task of making it this easy handheld or console-like experience of getting into all of your games on a handheld PC. And so there's room for the Windows team to make improvements there, and he's given quotes where he said like, yeah, no, we need to be better at that. So presumably that will come. Will that come along with a renewed push? And like, people talk about an Xbox handheld, and maybe that's how we get there, but maybe it ends up being a Windows PC and a portable Windows PC. I don't think a portable Xbox holds much appeal, because you end up with developers having to support the Xbox. And while I'm sure that's what Xbox would like to have happen, supporting Xbox by supporting the Xbox store on a Windows 11 based handheld, I believe Microsoft still gets a cut of that too. So maybe that's a way that they can kind of do both. And the rest of it, we'll see. I don't know. Like, will they feel some kind of corporate pressure to align themselves with all the AI bullshit that the rest of the company has invested itself in? And will that be a drag? Will that be shitty? Will that be a big waste of time? Probably. I wonder how much time has already been spent trying to like have an AI conversation about the next generation Xbox, and put together that pitch deck and try to, as they're trying to figure out like, okay, what can we do? What can we get away with? And what's going to get the rest of the company excited at a time when the rest of the company is going hog wild into this AI bullshit? Are we just going to be like, the next Xbox controller is going to have a fucking Microsoft Copilot button on it, and you're going to push it, and then you're going to talk to it, and you're going to say, I want to buy a game, and it's going to say, cool, man, I can't do that. I can load up the store, and you can click some buttons. You want to do that? because that's what we need, more voice assistance in consoles. That's it's worked out great so far. It's definitely a thing that players want. It's definitely a thing that players need. It's definitely like, how are we even playing video games without this? That's what I want to know. They took Cortana out of Windows. How am I don't even know how to use a computer anymore if I can't talk to my sweet lady Cortana. It's like a series of questionable ideas. I don't know. So, I guess I would say I continue to wonder what the future of Xbox looks like. But in the grand scheme of things, I might blow that up to say, what does a PlayStation 6 look like, and all of that stuff too. Like when we get to this PS5 Pro stuff, and it, presumably comes out later this year, and then Nintendo's going to be kind of right around the corner with their stuff as well. Like, what does the console business look like in 2026, 2027? And who are the players and who's left? Does Microsoft eventually, and I don't mean Xbox, because, Xbox, there's a passionate team of people that believe in consoles and all that sort of stuff that are in the Xbox division. But what I mean is, like, the larger company of Microsoft, what is their appetite for this stuff on a go-forward basis? And people have been having that conversation about the Xbox division for about as long as there's been an Xbox division. Like, hey, how long is the company really going to care about this stuff? Because it used to tie into Microsoft's weird quest for a set-top box to get out from the office and be in the living room. And be in more parts of people's lives. And they shit the bed on phones. Windows Phone was fine. They just didn't sell any of them. And so how much do they still care about, like, we need to be part of the living room or whatever? How much of that is still a thing in these kind of headier cloud-based days where they're just like, fuck it, man. We'll build a Microsoft service into all of these televisions, and then people can do what they want with it, or whatever. Like, they don't necessarily need to be putting silicon in a box and throwing that box onto your TV to achieve their corporate goals, at least in theory. Getting third parties on board and all that other stuff is obviously a consideration there. So, I don't know. We'll see. It continues to be a weird time, but I found that little bit fascinating because obviously, like, a lot of the conversations around Game Pass and as much we talk about, well, Game Pass is the thing that matters to them. Game Pass is the future for them. And it's going to be like, all of that is predicated on continued, kind of tier one support from third parties. And if that starts to fall away, your subscription service starts to have a lot more holes in it. And so what does that mean for them down the line? We got a little bit of word on what Remedy is working on. This comes out of videogameschronicle.com. Where they're saying that Remedy is saying that players should expect a more regular cadence of sequels for Alan Wake and Control. Their ambition is to grow them into franchises that have high brand recognition, steadily growing user base, more regular cadence of sequels, and an ability to generate revenues and profits at a high level. This came out of a financial call. Can you tell? Taro Vertala, the CEO of Remedy, is the one giving these quotes. As part of their full year financial results. But there's just a little bit here on the couple of games they got in the works. It says here, Control 2 continued in the proof of concept stage. In the fourth quarter, the team worked particularly on world building and combat. Okay. That's a nice little extra detail. Codename Condor, a cooperative multiplayer game set in the Control universe, is continuing in the production readiness stage, and the team focused on combat and game mechanics. Both games have proven fun and engaging gameplay, according to the CEO of the company making the game. Max Payne 1 and 2 Remake also continued in the production readiness stage. The team made considerable progress throughout the year. This is going to be a major new game with great potential, enabled by a similar development budget as Alan Wake 2. And that during the first half of this calendar year, they will advance to the next stages of development, whatever that means. And they also have the game known as codename Kestrel, which was previously known as codename Vanguard, and Vanguard was to be a free-to-play game, but it is no longer going to be that. It is a, quote, premium game with a strong cooperative multiplayer component. This is the game that Tencent is paying them to make, and Tencent will publish it. And overall, it says 2023 was a challenging yet remarkable year for Remedy. Annual revenue declined by 22.2%. An operating loss of 28.6 million euros. Though Alan Wake was a critical and commercial success, and Remedy did spend a bunch of money, or some amount of money, acquiring the full rights to the Control franchise, because 505 Games owned some part of those. So they got themselves free of 505 and fully own Control now, which costs some money. I'm sure that impacted whatever their, overall operating costs were. I am very interested in both of those Control games. A Control 2 is a game that I feel is a must make. I love that they are going to make it. I am very excited to see it. Man, I remember the first time I saw Control was E3 Judges Week. And it was probably at the 505, like it was probably like with other 505 games. And so they had like a handful of things there. And so you're kind of rotating from machine to machine. And I remember sitting down and seeing Control and playing it for a bit. And just, it was just here's a chunk of gameplay, and like, go run here and do this, and you're going to need to look at the map because it's that kind of game, and so on. And like you knew a little, I knew a little bit about Control going in, but you just, like I thought of Quantum Break, a game that had potential, but just from a gameplay perspective, never really worked it out, never really got where it needed to go. And then the TV stuff ended up being kind of a drag. And so you're just like, well, I don't know. Remedy, at that point, Remedy felt like a studio that always gets close, but never quite gets it done. That's kind of where I'd kind of landed on Remedy, kind of through that era. And then I sat down and played Control, and I was like, fuck, like, okay, yeah, no, like I am fucking 10,000% on board with this thing. Like, played it, flung some shit around, did a little bit of gunplay, kind of saw what they were going for with that stuff, and just caught a little bit of the vibes of that game. Because in a gameplay demo, especially in that, like, there aren't always a ton of cinematics, and it's hard out of context to really get a full sense of how those cinematics and how that story will play out. But like, I left that demo like thinking Control is something special. Control is something absolutely special. It immediately, upon playing it, was like, yep, no, this is, they have figured some shit out here. They have advanced technologically. They have made a better playing game than their last release. Like, this is moving in the right direction. And by the time that thing came in and sitting down and playing the full game, which I was on paternity leave. That was when my first daughter was born. And it was like that and Gears 5 were out around the same time. And god damn, Control is a good fucking game. Just the style, the typography, the atmosphere, the characters, the universe that they have created, the story they are telling. I fucking love it. Top to fucking bottom, man. And so Control 2 can't help but be disappointing at this point, right? With how highly I think that is the game of the year it came out in, and I don't know that I've played a better game since. It's fantastic. So yeah, Control 2, I am very excited to see it. I am also, the thing I would also say is because I like the world of that game and a lot of the, you know, the kind of the moment to moment gameplay of Control, I think the idea of them making a co-op multiplayer thing set in the Control universe is also very exciting. Like, that's something I'm like, yes, I would fucking love to know more about whatever that thing is. That's probably cool. And so, yeah, I just, the idea that there's not one but two Control follow-ups coming, and that they plan to do more with Alan Wake down the line and turn those into franchises and stuff. Alan Wake 2 was a hell of a game, and I'm very interested, you know, like I loved Max Payne 1 and 2 when they came out, but those games feel like they're from such a specific time that the idea of making a game like that in this day and age feels a little weird. Like, so that's part of why I don't think I like Max Payne 3. I think that and maybe some of that's the developer change. You could chalk it up to that if you wanted to. But I think the older character, the different, more colorful vibe, you know, it got rock starred up, Max Payne 3. And I just, you know, some people love that game and it's got a great soundtrack. I mean, you know, it's awesome, but I just could not get into Max Payne 3. And I think that Max Payne 1 and 2 are pretty hard to go back to. So the idea of them doing a remake, I think, is really fascinating. Also because I think that type of, like Max Payne 1 and 2 are PC games through and through, man. They came out on consoles and they played okay there, but like those games are so wrapped up in like the PC, like the Texas shooter scene, or, you know, like the lineage of Max Payne feels like it comes out of Doom and Quake and all of that sort of stuff, from just like how it played at the time and all of that shit. Like, it feels like it's of that lineage. And that lineage is weird now. Or like, I don't think you can make a Max Payne game that sticks close to the way Max Payne 1 and 2 played without it seeming really strange now. And there are so many third-person games to go off of, and so many different codified control schemes and different things that are modern, you know, like about that are modern about third-person shooters. But I don't know, you know, like I'm torn between, I think the feel of those first two games is awesome with a mouse and keyboard, but I don't necessarily want to play more of that. Especially El Paso Elsewhere came out and was an awesome kind of throwback. Like, if you like Max Payne and haven't played El Paso Elsewhere, you absolutely should. But like, that game works because it's a throwback to the Max Payne mechanics. And so I like modernizing the Max Payne mechanics is how you get Max Payne 3. And I don't want that either. So like, figuring out where that middle ground is, like that seems like a really hard thing. So I just wonder, like, are these remakes going to be gameplay faithful to the original games, or are they trying to modernize that aspect of it as well? And how far are they going to go? Like, I'm very interested to see what they end up doing. Very interested. That seems like a project that could go sideways, it could go sideways in slow motion. But that seems like something that could be really cool, or could feel like, I don't know, maybe we don't need to see any more Max Payne down the line. But we'll see. We've also got a report here on Overwatch 2. The kind of, I guess, Overwatch 2 woes kind of continue. This is Video Games Chronicles report via Bloomberg. And the report here is, Overwatch 2 developers were informed that the company does not plan to finish any of the remaining planned PvE content. And that in late 2023, members of the Overwatch team were told that based on the game's poor financial performance in the first half of the year, they shouldn't have received anything in regard to performance-related bonuses. which is a fucking terrible thing to hear, I guess. But also, yeah. This all kind of comes alongside the news that they are retooling the monetization on that game to make the characters freely available. You don't have to buy the characters anymore. They will instead monetize on skins and all that other stuff, I guess. And I wonder if this is a Microsoft, because they're now owned by Microsoft, they can kind of absorb a little bit more by being on Game Pass, and so they don't have to monetize in the same ways that they used to, or something. But it's crazy to think about how. I mean, even before release, Overwatch, the concept of Overwatch. And Overwatch originally starting as an MMO and all of that other stuff before it finally became a hero shooter and still managed to become a very massive game. Activision launched a whole esports league on the back of it, and it was huge. It felt like it had big mainstream appeal to the esports side of things and then a way more casual scene. It had so much pornographic fan art that it drove Battleborn into the dirt. And it felt like one of the biggest games in the world. And they couldn't hold on to it. And they could not keep it going. And now it just feels like this weird struggle of just like, they're trying to figure out what matters about this game and trying to tune it in ways, and it's like, hey, we're going to try out these new rule sets in arcade, and people just want to play Overwatch and don't want to dick around with all this different bullshit, and and they've slapped the number 2 on it and shut the first game off at the same time and made it free to play, and try, like the Overwatch 1 certainly went through its trials and tribulations in the kind of later stages of its existence, but it's Overwatch 2 did not fix that. That did not put smiles on faces. That did not put the butts in the seats the way they probably hoped it would. And I wonder if at this point, if they're just going to they'll call it Overwatch Classic or whatever. But yeah, do they undo some of the gameplay changes they made in Overwatch 2? I know they did some of that already, right? But there's just a weird, what a crazy mess of a situation, I don't know how you unfuck that. Overwatch 3, probably. You start to unfuck that by like, okay, we're gonna like go in the trenches, we're gonna have a live team kind of continue to service this game, and then holy shit, we've got to like dig ourselves into a bunker somewhere and then come up with the ultimate Overwatch experience. And we're just going to drop the 2, and it's just going to be called Overwatch now. Here's Overwatch 3. It's called Overwatch. And it is Overwatch. It is very much like Overwatch 1. But I don't think that fixes it, right? Like that, there's probably like a hardcore fan base that would be psyched. Be like, oh, it's about time they got rid of all this Overwatch 2 shit and made it more like the first game. But the first game felt like it was falling off on its own. So, how do you get it back to that zeitgeist moment? How do you get it back to like, hey, Overwatch is going to be one of the biggest games in the world and people are going to love it again? And it won't be a game that every time the name comes up, people go, fuck Overwatch, am I right? Like, how do they get that stink off of it? Because I'm sure there are plenty of people that are just playing Overwatch still, and they're just like, whatever, we're having a good time. But I feel like in the larger conversation, Overwatch went from like, wow, this is the new big thing. This is going to be Fortnite and Overwatch and this and that, Roblox and to just sinking like a stone. And now it's Microsoft's stone to save. So maybe they will, because of the way that they are using Game Pass and so on and so forth, it will probably change some of the discussions that the team has to have around how do they monetize it and how do they sell it and how do they do this and that, because they can fall back on it being a Game Pass thing, hopefully. But it's already free to play, and now the heroes are free. So actually, now that I'm saying this out loud, what's left to put on Game Pass? Skins, I guess. And so maybe that's why we hear this other talk about services and perks and stuff as part of Game Pass. Is maybe it's a part of like, okay, we're gonna sell skins, and also if you're on Game Pass, you're gonna get a stipend of Overwatch bucks, or just hey, here's a free skin once every 3 months. Enjoy. I don't know how you dig your way out of that hole, man. That's a weird one. That's a real weird one. Yes, and team retention in a situation where it sounds like that they did not get bonused out in 2023. Yes, who's left that left Blizzard that they could bring back to Blizzard and say this person came back and now the game's going to get back on track. It feels like that's the World of Warcraft solution at some point. Margot Robbie's going to make a movie based on The Sims, or rather her production company has the rights to make a movie based on The Sims. The director of Loki, someone named Kate Herron, is also involved here. That they're going to make a Sims movie. It makes a lot of sense that someone with some of the minds behind the Barbie movie would go, dog, hear me out. The Sims. I think that makes sense in that highly specific way. What do you do with a Sims movie? I mean, you could do anything, right? I mean, that was the what people liked about the Barbie movie, right? Is on paper, Barbie's a blank slate, right? And you're just like, what story do we tell? Oh, I don't know. Barbie dolls get into the real world. There's a Barbie world and a real world. Can we do that? Yeah. But the fucked thing is like, that's what the Sims movie should be as well. And so, do you let Sims? Okay. But honestly though, the movie should be entirely in Simlish. They should be dedicated to the property. The entire game, the entire soundtrack, everything should be in Simlish, and then either subtitled in English or perhaps not. Do you make this with the player being a character in the movie and turn it into a vague kind of Truman Show like take on the world of The Sims? Do you play off the idea of Sims having free will or not having free will? Do you have one character escape the world of The Sims and get into the real world, and then that character can only speak Simlish? And it's very confusing. Yeah, yes. Does Will Wright do a cameo in this movie? I would hope so. I guess. But this seems, well, I don't know. It makes sense that this deal would get signed in a post Barbie era. This is someone thinking that they can recreate the magic of Barbie with another universe, and like I get it from the like desperate Hollywood side of things. But I feel like the fun thing to do would be, like, do you have a player play a character in this world? Is it a Tron situation? Does someone get sucked into the world of The Sims and they have a little bit more free will than The Sims do? How do you pay homage to the idea of Sims being trapped in a room with no doors and starving to death? Like, how do you, Like you would need to have that scene, right? Like you would need to have that, right? I think what they should do is like, whatever, do their movie, whatever the fuck it is, and then do another version of it that is in Simlish, and just basically the same way you have a black and white version of Johnny Mnemonic, or a black and white version of Mad Max or whatever. Do a Simlish version of the film. And I mean reshoot it with the actors speaking Simlish. I don't mean dub it in Simlish. I want to see their lips flapping in fucking Simlish. I want to hear a Simlish soundtrack. I want a dedication to the bit out of this is what I want. I want you to buy a ticket for the Sims movie and you don't know what showing you're going to go to. I want them to bring back the fucking magic and mystery of Clue in movie theaters, and you walk in and go, ah, shit, we accidentally got the Simlish version. And then the person you're with going like, no, that's the one we want. I don't want to fucking hear them talk. I don't want to have to understand any of this shit. Let's just sit down and enjoy this. And then I want a version of the movie with the good mods installed. I want the Sims to all be pregnant. I want the pregnant Sims. Every Sim is pregnant in my version of the film. Get someone put a baby in these boys. Okay, all right. I don't know. You know, sure, they should make a Sims movie. Couple of Marvel games in the works. Some people are working on some games based on Marvel properties. I don't know. One of these was unveiled at the Unreal Engine showcase at GDC, and it is coming next year. It is called Marvel 1943 Rise of Hydra. Appears to be a World War II era Captain America and Black Panther, along with a couple of other dudes. These dudes have names. Here we go. Here's the Video Games Chronicle.com has a report on this. Azuri, who is the World War II era Black Panther, Gabriel Jones, who is a member of the Howling Commandos, and Nanali, who is a leader of the fledgling Wakandan spy network. Okay, this is coming from Skydance. This is Skydance formed a studio a few years ago with Amy Hennig running it, and this is what Amy Hennig has been doing. Hennig has been doing for a while now. UE5, they put out a little clip of it. Looks nice. And Hennig had this to say about it. I can't imagine a better partner than Marvel for our first game. The Marvel universe epitomizes all the action, mystery, and thrills of the pulp adventure genre that I adore and lends itself perfectly to an interactive experience. It's an honor to be able to tell an original story with all the humanity, complexity, and humor that makes Marvel characters so enduring, and to enable our players to embody these heroes that they love. Okay. Yeah, the last thing she worked on was a Star Wars game, right? So, yeah. And, you know, of course, she's maybe best known for her work on the Uncharted games. Back in the day, I guess now. I guess that's a while ago now that all that happened. And the other game looks like will be unveiled tomorrow morning, though there has been a bit of a leak around what this is. The Marvel Games account on Twitter is saying, an evil experiment has caused a unique disruption in the time stream. Who will be pulled into this epic showdown? Get ready for an exciting reveal tomorrow, 8 a.m. So 8 a.m. Pacific time, they're going to announce a game that, according to leaks, is known as Marvel Rivals, and it is a third-person Overwatch-style game from NetEase. NetEase. NetEase sounds like the name of a lubricant to me. It's not. We got to go get a fresh tube of NetEase. Ugh. Someone in chat says, please don't be live service. Like, don't worry. It'll probably be a free to play Overwatch style shooter. It's from NetEase. It's all service. This is not going to be some big single player thing, I'm guessing. This is presumably a multiplayer focused, I thought it was described as like a 6v6 sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know. We'll find out tomorrow, I guess. And then possibly it is coming to console and mobile as well, according to some of the leaks, according to videogameschronicle.com, that is. And that's it for news. There was an Apex Legends tournament and a bunch of players got hacked. That also happened, and kind of stirred up the conversation around kernel-level anti-cheat on your PC games. And that shit was nuts. It was like they were playing in a tournament and suddenly like their game started getting fucking hacked mid-game. Like that another person somehow got access to server level commands or whatever it was. So EA has postponed the tournament until they can fucking figure out what happened and when. Easy Anti-Cheat got a finger pointed at them and they said, no, we don't think there's any remote code. There's no RCEs in our stuff. We're fairly confident about that. And then, yeah, so this kind of stirred up the conversation again around the idea of this kernel level anti-cheat that so many games are using these days. I feel like the last time people got really up in arms about it was Valorant. But this is not, I hate it. This is something there was a problem with Street Fighter V, right? Where they had to patch it because there was like a known exploitable RCE in Street Fighter V. Basically just like, here's a rootkit for you. And so the idea that, to play these games at all, you have to be subjected to basically kind of opening up a potential hole in your PC's security is fucking terrible. It's a terrible situation. I mean, the cheating in multiplayer games and the ways that people are doing it these days are so advanced and so lucrative financially, because the people that create these cheats then go on to sell them. That I get why developers would want to take this extremely extreme approach of just like, no, we'd rather like install a potential rootkit along with our game. And like the PR nightmare, like let's say this Apex thing wasn't just like someone funning around in a tournament, but they were like, oh, we figured out a way to completely gain access to someone's machine if they are playing Apex Legends. Or if they are, we've fully found a way to turn their machine into a botnet while they're playing Apex Legends. Or we've found a way to execute our own code on remote machines while they're playing Apex Legends. And so we can install keyloggers, we can install whatever we need to do. Basically, it's a input point. It's a breach point for us to inject a bunch of viruses and bad shit onto a PC. And imagine if it had been exploited that way. Like, that would be the end of Apex Legends. Past a certain point. If this had actually been exploited in ways that caused that kind of damage, and it was detected and found out and picked up, and like, oh, by the way, this, like, that would be it for Apex. Like, EA's stock would probably take a hit. So the idea that they're so willing to, like, that so many different publishers, not just EA, like the Apex thing is the most recent thing, and that's a weird thing that maybe isn't part of their anti-cheat, but maybe is, and we don't know for sure. That could be a separate exploit. I have not done the deep dive on that stuff. But the risk that some of these publishers are taking on by going with this style of anti-cheat is huge to me. You know, the risk just seems massive, because if that gets exploited, if someone finds a hole in it, if someone punches through it and it becomes known that, like, hey, by the way, everyone that had Valorant installed and running in this window of time potentially got exposed to this, and this, and these were being actively exploited by here, and here. It would be, that seems like it would be the end of that game. And maybe then people would, you know, think a lot harder about installing this sort of shit as a part of their anti-cheat. Like, companies would go like, oh, like if this happens, it's going to be real bad for us from a PR perspective. It's going to destroy the game. It's going to, like, destroy our ability to put the game out and all of this other shit. So I don't. So yeah, I don't know. You know, the reasoning is, you know, that's the only way that they can protect from the advanced levels of cheats that exist these days, and that they need that level of access to truly monitor a PC. My understanding is that some of the more advanced, you know, we're not talking about things that just, like, you know, we're beyond, like, here's a device you can hook up to a PS5 that lets you use a mouse and keyboard or not have any recoil or whatever. Like, my understanding is that it's like Fortnite players that have a weird memory module installed in their PC that hooks up to another PC, and then you can use that PC to monitor the RAM of the PC running Fortnite and then modify that RAM in real time. And so all of the cheats and exploits and all the crazy shit are happening off of the main machine. And so the anti-cheat has a much harder time finding it. Which sounds expensive. I don't like the idea that you're selling this sort of stuff and everything. But, like, there are plenty of companies out there that sell subscriptions to cheat services, and they're just like, hey man, do you want to cheat in Warzone? We can get you that. And when they break this one, we're gonna create another one, and so just from the financial end of that, I get why I get why companies want to take really extreme measures to try to protect their game from, like, at some point that's criminal. You know, at some point that's like, okay, like you're fucking up the service. You're fucking up you're causing a lot of bad times for other players. And that is hurting the game and so on. But also, just like, the amount of money that can be made by selling those subscription service cheats and all of that other shit is really crazy too. And so you don't want another company creating a cheat business on the back of your game. And so, you know, like that's some, just, there's so much really crazy shit out there. And yeah, there are devices that are just, like, designed to eliminate recoil from guns firing in multiplayer games. And there are, you know, that stuff is eventually detectable in some ways. That's some of the stuff that, like, when Microsoft and Sony's doing some of the same stuff, and Call of Duty has made some changes as well, when they just get better about detecting unlicensed accessories, like, that's some of the stuff they're talking about. It's like, hey, okay, we're going to not allow unlicensed accessories because some of those are these weird devices that people are plugging in to do freaky shit. And so, yeah, it's a mess. In short, it's a fucking mess, dude. The idea that I am forced to, like, if I want to play these games, I mean, you'd always just not play these games, and then that's always going to be an option, right? And if more people did that, then maybe there would be a change. But, like, I don't know what the change would be. And it seems like more and more games are using it. Like, I'm not playing, when I play Apex, I play it on a console. But I believe Ricochet, I believe the anti-cheat in Call of Duty is now, like, a kernel-level thing. I think pretty much everyone doing any kind of serious anti-cheat stuff on a PC, like, they're doing it this way. I don't think that this is an uncommon approach anymore. Like, when Valorant did it, they were not even the first to do it, but but they got a lot of heat at the time, and they kind of issued some statements, but ultimately we're just like, okay, well, we hear you, but that doesn't mean we're going to change it. Like, BattlEye still exists and all this other stuff. Like, there's still a lot of other stuff out there that is, doing this sort of stuff. So thank you, but no. And it didn't hurt them. Valorant still went on to become a very big game, despite those early misgivings that people had about it. So, like, there is no incentive for a developer to not go down this road. And there's plenty of incentive for them to protect their game, to make it playable for the players that are playing it. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I wish that there was. I don't know what the answer is there. I mean, the answer is don't play those games. But that's I am not doing that. That is not my approach. I am playing some of those games. It happens. Why don't we get into some emails here? Podcast@guard.bike is the email address. You can send in emails to me, and I will receive them, and I will look at them, and I will go, okay. And some of them I will do on the show. Let's where'd they go? Here they are. Like this one from Cody from Orange County. Can you see a world either on both where either or both Sony or Microsoft take the Nintendo Switch approach with their next console? Sony could be testing the waters with their PlayStation Portal, similar to what Switch did with the Wii U, and with the Portal being more popular than many predicted. Where I believe Sony would differentiate from the Switch is that the dock would have its own CPU and GPU that works in tandem with the portable, a 32X approach of sorts. With kids favoring more portable devices and the traditional home console seemingly being in need of change, do you think something like this would be possible? Sure. Anything is possible, right? But is this do we think that this is the road that they will go down? I think, like, if the Xbox approach is going to change dramatically, and they're going to look at Xbox as more of a series of devices and services, and maybe you own a device, maybe you don't, maybe you play on PC, maybe you play on your phone via stream, maybe, like their whole thing. I do see a world where Microsoft does try to sell some hardware of its own and it is a portable device, but I don't see them treating that as like their only road. For a platform holder that has mostly been running on the notion of choice and player choice, and like, you can do this or not. I don't see them like going a whole hog on a handheld device. I do think that they will, push the Windows team to continue to make Windows better for people that want to play on handheld PCs. And I think that has a lot of potential. It would be nice, speaking of anti-cheat, to be able to play some of the games that don't run on a Steam Deck because the anti-cheat does not run under Linux. That'd be cool. It'd be cool to have a version of Windows that was a little more able to optimize itself to run in that environment. Whether that's something that is happening in an automated fashion. I don't know. I don't think you're buying a separate version of Windows. You're not buying like it's Windows 12 Gaming Edition or Windows 12 Handheld Gaming PC Edition or whatever. But if Windows 12 could be like, hey, we're going to automatically turn on game mode, and they sort of do some of this to an extent. But if it was just like, hey, here's we're able to focus this install in such a way to where Windows gets out of its own way a little bit better to make your game experience a little bit smoother, devote a little bit more resources to it, with the idea being that you're really only going to be running one game at a time and not really going to be multitasking the same way that you do on a desktop PC. And so maybe there's some things that could be done there. The existing game mode in Windows 11 doesn't really do much. So they could be better on that. They could be better on navigating the UI with a controller. That would be big. I don't really see Sony going all in on a handheld device as its like main platform. I don't think the need is there. I don't think that is, like they're seeing great success with the PlayStation 5 as it stands, right? I don't think that like the entire Sony approach right now has been, let's just keep doing what we're doing until the wheels fall off. And maybe the wheels will fall off eventually. And that will basically necessitate some kind of greater change. But I don't know. I don't really see, I don't really see that being a primary device for Sony. They could, as a secondary device, as something like that, whether it runs the same games or not, that's something they could potentially experiment with. They would probably prefer to do that as a streaming device, so that they don't end up in a situation where they're supporting two different power levels, two different SKUs, or three once they have a PlayStation 6 Pro down the line. But no, I guess my answer is no. I don't see that happening. I think Nintendo has been very good at making devices that are not cutting edge from a just straight up pushing polygons kind of perspective and making that work for their type of game. And I think that has cost them a lot of third-party support, because it becomes more challenging to make games run well on that device. If you're making games for PlayStation 5 and you want to make them on the Switch next, there's a lot of lift there. And also the sale, that's another case we were talking about, kind of sales on Xbox and what does that mean? Like that's, when we think about the third-party support on the Switch and which kind of like big games do and don't come to the Switch, that's why those decisions are made. They're a little more extreme because it costs more, and it's a heavier lift to port a game to the Switch. So when you see something like Mortal Kombat 1 coming out, you're like, oh, okay. And maybe that one makes sense because that is a very mainstream kind of product. When Doom came to the Switch, it was like, oh, why? All right, sure. Did anyone buy that? I don't know. But third-party, big game third-party sales on Switch or on Nintendo platforms feel like it hasn't mattered in the same way as it does to the other platform holders since the days of the GameCube, I guess. I feel like that's the last time that a Nintendo platform got like full-throated third-party support. Eric in Saskatchewan says, I'm considering buying a Mister, and I'm wondering, can you tell the difference when playing a game on the Mister compared to playing on an emulator? What are the differences? Yeah, that's a debatable point, and I think some people are going to feel it and some people won't. The theoretical benefit of the Mister, which is an FPGA-based device, is that it is more capable of recreating the real hardware in real time. And thus there's a lot of optimization that emulators have to do that, just kind of you don't necessarily have to do, or I say different type of optimization in a lot of cases when it comes to FPGA core development. The Mister traditionally has much lower input latency than a lot of software-based emulators where, we were talking about Windows getting out of its own way. Emulators running on a PC, you end up, especially people that like to run them on Android phones and Raspberry Pis and all this other shit. Like the rise of emulation on these lower-powered devices out there has been interesting, but also like frustrating. But there are things you can do to mitigate some of that input latency on a powerful PC. And but basically, I guess the way I've always described it is most emulators on a PC can kind of only do one thing at a time. And so if you're emulating a device that has multiple processors, it has to emulate everything way faster than normal to try to make sure that everything is ready in time. Whereas on a FPGA, since you're kind of recreating the chips, the things that would happen simultaneously, because you've got two CPUs working in tandem and a APU and, you know, whatever else kind of coming together to run, you know, your sound hardware, all this other stuff, that all of those things kind of run at the same time and everything's kind of there at the same time. Whereas on a PC, you're kind of like rushing through to make sure you're emulating everything. And at the end, it all lines up. And you know, in a lot of cases, I think a lot of players are not going to notice any meaningful difference between those things. I think as emulation on the software side has gotten a lot better, there are plenty of experiences you can have on a PC that are fantastic and basically indistinguishable. If you are particularly noticeable to input lag, or you're playing games that are very notorious for their input lag, you might find that on a PC or especially on a lower powered device that you're having a very hard time getting those rhythm games to play properly. Your Parappas, Guitar Freaks, DDR, that sort of stuff. Whereas the FPGA based stuff, it's lower latency to an HDMI screen, but also you can hook it up to a CRT. And so once you're kind of hooked up to a CRT, you're kind of getting something that becomes more indistinguishable from the real thing, or as it used to be. But even on HDMI, like that was something where, you know, I'm running mine through, it's direct video out, so it's technically analog video out, but it's going into a RetroTink and then it's coming out to my HDMI, you know, coming out to my OLED TV. But the input latency feels great. And so you'll have things like people that couldn't beat Mike Tyson before on an NES emulator are able to do it with a Mister, because the latency is so much tighter and feels like the real thing. That's generally speaking the benefit. And that's going to be something you're going to feel one way or the other, you know, depending on how receptive you are or perceptive you are when it comes to input lag and that type of latency. And depending on the game, you might not notice it at all. So it's really, it's one of those things that, like, yes, it's theoretically better. Do I feel it every time I pick up a controller and play a game? Absolutely not. But that benefit is there, and it's pretty fucking cool. But the thing is, like, you know, like a lot of it's the promise of the FPGA based thing when I was initially exposed to it was, hey, we're reprogramming these gate arrays to be identical to the original hardware, and they behave identically to the original hardware. But ultimately, that's up to the person developing the core. That, you know, how you build that thing is kind of up to you. So, you know, you can go in and recreate all the chips and recreate all the, you know, the connections to those chips the way that they initially were. But some developers take an approach that is not that different from the way software emulators are developed, and in fact start some of their development in a software emulator. And so, like, that's sort of weird. And so you have a lot of these situations that are like, oh, it's less than perfect because the core's not done, or the core was done in a different way, and all this. The Mister can play N64 games. Here's an example. And it's a very tight fit. The FPGA can only hold so much when it comes to recreating that hardware. And it does not have enough space to kind of do it the quote unquote right way. And so the developer is a wizard who managed to cram most of that stuff in there. But he hit a point relatively recently, earlier this month, where he was like, hey, I'm done with the N64 core. Like, realistically, there's no more work I can do. Like, there's a handful of games that don't run properly, and I can't, like, I cannot fit any more in here. So I can't make this work. And so this last handful of games that don't run properly because the timing and constraints and whatever else, like, that's just how it is. It's amazing that we got this far. And so you would need a larger FPGA to fit more stuff in it. And so Analog says they're going to sell an N64 next year, right? And so we'll see how expensive that thing ends up being. There are bigger FPGAs out there to be had, but they're fucking expensive. So the Mister is kind of this perfect point of like, it's a big enough FPGA to be very capable of a lot of different hardware, a lot of different arcade boards, and a lot of different devices. And also it's available on a board that is made in particularly large quantities, because it's a board that is often sold for like educational purposes to people that are learning how to program an FPGA. And so it's kind of benefited by that production scale. Like it has a relatively lower price, a relatively, you know, like more attainable device. And I don't know that there are many more FPGAs that are bigger while still feeling like they are in this affordable range where it makes sense, because, you know, industrial FPGA design is a crazy field, and it's a crazy field. But like those devices get fucking crazy expensive really fast. And so I wonder, like, and this probably wouldn't work for reasons I would never know, but like, what if you just bought two of the FPGA, the two of the cores of the Misters, and slapped them onto one board, and then offloaded some of the processing to one or the other, and then could you build a dual Mister and then put dual SD RAM in each one of those and have quad RAM? There's probably reasons why that wouldn't work, but anyway, it feels like in some cases we're reaching the kind of top of the power, like the abilities of the FPGA inside of the Mister. And, you know, the N64 is something that's not completable. Someone is working on the CPS3 hardware, Capcom's arcade hardware, which that'd be cool. You know, for people that want to play a lot of Street Fighter 3, that'll be cool. Someone attempted a Jaguar core, but it's not currently being worked on. And so it's nowhere near complete. There's a handful of other things out there. And so some folks got together relatively recently and said, hey, we're working on a new device. We're working on a like kind of a replacement for the Mister. It's going to be a more powerful FPGA, and it's going to have, you know, these nice features and this sort of that. And they started talking about it. I believe they brought it to a retro show, and showed off like a little bit of it, but like Mortal Kombat 1 apparently will not fit properly. The timing is too tight to work on the existing Mister hardware. And so they're like, well, this thing we're making, it'll run Mortal Kombat 1. It'll do that. And but I don't, you know, they have been very teasery about that. I talked about it recently, but like the most of the stuff they've said about it has been like, here's a teaser kind of thing that we're showing, like it's going to run this. We're going to try to develop this, and it's going to come to this. And I don't like it feels like even the frequency of those teases has slowed down. In fact, I'm going to look and see if they've had anything to say lately. Not really. They're mostly just retweeting stuff about other emulation projects and so on and so forth. So I don't know. But they do imply that they will have 3DO up and running on their device. And if that thing comes to fruition, I will happily buy one. I would love to get more of that. They're assembling a team of extremely knowledgeable people that are saying that they're involved in the making of this device and all of this stuff. And so hopefully when they finally have something meaningful to show, it'll be meaningful. But the way they've been talking about it has been so sporadic and so on and so forth that it's hard to get a sense of like, what is the next step forward in FPGA, open source FPGA development. because sometimes it feels like the Mister is again, N64 not fitting all the way. PlayStation is really, really good. Saturn is coming along all the time. And Saturn runs so much better now than it did, but it's still, the sound is not necessarily where it needs to be, but that's getting there. But like you get this feeling of just like, I'm not sure how much more they'll be able to do on this platform. I mean, there's still scads more to do. There's so many different arcade boards that would fit in an FPGA of that size that have not been made. And so there's tons of things that could be done there. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like that some of that work is slowing down a little bit. We'll see. I love the Mister. I think it's a fantastic device. I think that, there's been there's been a lot of interesting development on that thing for a good long time. And it's so cool. And it is a nice, tiny, compact device. That was something that like, we had to, when we were getting ready to move out, we were, or when we were fixing up the house and we were getting the carpets taken out and all this other stuff. And it was like, we gotta leave the house for a couple of days, and it's kind of all happening all at once. And oh geez, this is taking longer than we thought it did. And so we were kind of like on the run for a little bit. And I brought the Mister with me, and I was able to just like very quickly plug it into a TV, and it was just like, this is great. And we have this SD card full of tons of games. And if a Raspberry Pi is enough for you in that format, that's way cheaper. And I don't like the experience of like a Raspberry Pi 3 was really the last time I did it, but like the 3 and 4 and but like the last time I tried it was on a Raspberry Pi 4, and I was like, this is okay for a lot of stuff, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. And so the Mister, when you plug it in, it is a compact device similar to a Raspberry Pi, and it just feels right for the cores, for the consoles, for the platforms it supports. Generally speaking, it feels really, really nice. And yeah, it's fucking cool. But for a lot of people, they're not going to see the benefit to that, and they're going to be fine with a Raspberry Pi. And for them, I say, go for it. Like, it's not like, I'm not saying that to be like, I don't want to be snobbish about it. If you are emulating shit on a Raspberry Pi, hooked up to a fucking arcade cabinet, whatever the fucking weird shit you've got, if you like where it's at, that's cool too. I play most of my emulated stuff these days. I play here in front of the PC or on a Steam Deck. And the Steam Deck has been really great for a lot of that stuff in a portable format. And running a lot of that stuff on the PC has been great too. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's retro achievements are really powerful as well, and that's something that an FPGA is not going to be able to do. Well, someone could probably build that in, but that's the amount of work. Like most, people always go like, how come this doesn't have save states? And it's like, well, listen, if you knew how this stuff really worked, you would understand why there are basically no save states on an FPGA, except for a handful of cores actually do have it. And it's fucking crazy that it does. Basically. Let's see. That one is way too long. Luis from Florida writes in and says, with a new PlayStation and Xbox in the future, I'm sitting here wondering what could possibly get me excited for a new set of consoles. My setup is a familiar one. A decent PC with a Switch means all of my bases are covered in terms of games. Pretty much any exclusive releases on PS5 or Series X eventually came to PC or were simultaneously released to PC. So I completely skipped these consoles, and now there's a new batch coming. I thought long and hard on what could pique my interest in new consoles, and all I could think of was being able to suspend and resume multiple game sessions on demand, as easily as opening and closing a 3DS. I know you're professionally obligated to have a look at new major hardware, but do you have features or ideas on your own shortlist for what could get you personally interested in new consoles, even pie in the sky type stuff? Well, Thank you for writing, Luis. The suspend and resume on demand stuff is something that the Xbox theoretically does now. I don't trust it. I've never trusted it. Even suspending games on the PlayStation 5, you occasionally run into a situation where, like, hey, remember that game you had suspended? Well, there was a patch for it, and we patched the game. We had to close it to do that, by the way. Hopefully you saved. Anyway, welcome back. Yeah. What would new consoles do? Presumably we get more powerful graphics. They are cramming more moves onto the disc, if you will. They are improving the visuals, higher resolutions, better frame rates, better ray tracing. Let's assume that that's kind of par for the course to some extent. The wheels will get ever so slightly rounder. And that's, hey, that's the sort of stuff we're seeing with this talk about the PS5 Pro, right? You're like, oh, okay, 45% more this and that, and better ray tracing and so on. Count Markula in the chat says, maybe not run Dragon's Dogma 2 at 30 frames per second? To which I say, yeah, but do not get it twisted. Dragon's Dogma 3, or the equivalent, they'll make all those same choices again. I don't care how much GPU you throw at a game developer. They will eventually, or CPU, I guess in this case, they will find a way to fill it up and then some, and then ship a game that runs at 20 frames per second. They will find a way to make it real. They will find a way to make that happen. It could be like, oh yeah, it's all running at 4K now. It's still 28 frames per second most of the time, but man, there's a lot of NPCs in here. And sometimes they're dead, and we have to track all that stuff, and so the CPU gets chewed up pretty fast. They've always prioritized that, ahead of performance. And so don't expect that to change. That's something you get early in a generation because developers haven't found out ways to take advantage of all the power yet. And then they're like, all right, we're better at optimizing, but also we want to cram all this stuff in too. So I'm generalizing, of course, but yeah, what would get me excited about next generation consoles? I don't know. I'm finding that I am not using the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X all that often. And when I do, it's for games that are not available anywhere else, which means in the case of the Xbox, I'm not really left with a ton of reasons to boot up the Xbox. For me, that situation's a little different because sometimes developers will send a code and be like, here's a code for our Xbox version. And you're like, okay, cool. And that's where I play the game. I play the game where the code shows up. Sometimes developers ask, sometimes they don't. And so I at the end of the day, I play them wherever. Generally speaking, that ends up being PC. And generally speaking, that, if it's a console version, it usually ends up being PS5. That just ends up being how it goes. But when I think about like what else do you want going forward? I don't have a great answer to that question. I like the always online nature of the consoles and the consoles as kind of a social concept, but I feel like PlayStation Network and Xbox Live as social networks have really fallen by the wayside. I think at some point you're just like, I don't care about, I'm not building another big wide friends list. I don't care. Like, Xbox changed to a followers model. I don't know how many followers I have on Xbox, and it doesn't matter. You don't need 100 friends. You need the 3 you play games with at the end of the day. Right. And so the way a lot of that stuff works is really weird. Yeah, the PS5 is getting updated to some of the game tips stuff that they implemented in PS5 that no one ever used. They're now going to somehow take community submissions for those game tips, which I would put. Okay. We'll see how that goes. Like Discord is a better network of friends that I might play games with someday than anything else. And I don't want it to integrate any of the, like I don't, no one has a Twitter integration anymore because Twitter is a fucking garbage dump now. I say now as if it wasn't one before, but you know what I mean. It is a different type of garbage dump now. So maybe we'll get Threads integration. I don't know. Put the PlayStation 5 on the Fediverse. That's what I say. But yeah, in terms of like what features do you do in a console that make it like different, make it stand out in a fresh way? Because yeah, okay, sure, it'll, hey, we have more performant ray tracing and 4K is a little bit better and blah blah blah. Like, yeah, I get it. That's cool. Yeah, that's what they said about the PS5, and it never really, like, sure, it's fine, but it's not enough. Like, I feel like there needs to be an additional pitch, a better, another something else going on, right? It feels like there's an opportunity there, right? Or if they're going to keep selling these things to people, it needs to be based on more than just like, man, now we said we've been telling you 4K for the last 15 years, but now we mean it. Like, that's not a selling point, now that we're finally getting up the power curve enough to maybe genuinely run games at 4K instead of checkerboarding them up there or doing whatever the fuck else. Like, they've already played the 4K card for 2-3 generations now, 2.5 generations, whatever. And so like, that's not going to be a big selling point on its own. How do you sell these things to people? What's the new thing? It's going to end up being AI. If the current buzzword ratio is maintained for the next few years, then they will fucking cram a bunch of stupid AI shit into it. But like, again, what do you do there that's not just like, we got a voice assistant and you can ask it for help? Like, okay, well, we're giving developers access to these AI tools and they can use our LLMs to make NPCs that talk to you. Like, okay, NPCs have been talking to me for years. Like, does this ends up like the early ray tracing stuff where it's like, oh, if this worked as advertised and was performant and cool and all this stuff, maybe this would be potentially interesting for the right kind of game. But it turns out when writers write games and write dialogue and write characters, turns out that's actually a better experience the vast majority of the time. So why are we doing this? So yeah, I don't know. I like, my worry is that, yeah, it'll be a bunch of empty promises around AI shit. And they'll try to just like back into some kind of desperate metaverse where like, hey, AI in the metaverse are back, and now the PlayStation Home 2 is going to suck your dick, and I don't know, like whatever it's going to do. So yeah, I don't have a good answer to this question, except for that. I mean, it did that. That's compelling, but I don't currently have a good answer to this question. There's like little stuff that you go like, oh, well, it'd be neat if this, like if it just was more tightly integrated with Discord, that would be more convenient for me in some weird way. Or if it was like this, or if the social network was built this way, or something like, if the achievement menu was easier to get to, if it was one fewer button press away, or, like little things like that. But that's not something that sells a console. Like I think the PS5 front end could be drastically better than it is now. The Xbox front end as well, you know, could certainly be better and more focused on gaming and the things I like to do while gaming. If it was just focused on me and my needs, and maybe that's the answer. We've put you, the player, at the center of the experience. Here in the Xbox 362, if you want blades, you can have them. And it's a fully customizable UI. Themable UI. And then they'll sell you blades for an extra $14.99. Console UI DLC. You want the good UX? Oh yeah, give us another $20. Hey, if you give us $25 a year, we'll even shut off the ads for you. Isn't that nice of us? Aren't we the best? I just gave myself the chills thinking about what is now almost guaranteed to be our future. That's okay. That's terrifying. Yeah, I don't know. It's a nightmare. Sushi X 2100 writes in and says, I want to buy Helldivers 2 on Steam, but upon reading the reviews, I've seen a lot of negative reviews in regard to the anti-cheat software operating at the kernel level, going above admin control. I just want to know, is this safe or should I pass? Playing on console is not an option for me. Is anything safe? Is anything safe? Is the kernel level anti-cheat in a game safe? Like, technically no, but like also, is Windows secure? Is Steam, you know, are all the other things that you're running on your computer, is all of it safe? Like things are getting patched all the time. Is Linux safe? No. Mac OS feels less safe all the time. Mac OS seems like the bulletproof OS for a long time, simply because it felt like virus developers were not bothering to make Mac viruses. They were just like, no one's using one of these anyway. And now that's not the case. Like you see, you know, a lot more discussion about vital Mac OS updates. They're like, no, you should really update this one. This one's kind of in the wild, so just good at it. There was just a thing, you know, earlier this week saying like, hey, we discovered a hardware vulnerability in all of the current like the current MacBook chips, like the M3s and M1s and all that stuff. They're just like, oh, and there was a similar thing on a lot of PC CPUs. They're just like, oh, turns out there's a fatal flaw in these things, and we found a way to patch the flaw. Also, it's going to reduce the processing ability of your CPU when we patch it. So, sorry, we're Intel. And then I think AMD ended up in a similar boat not that long after that on some of their CPUs. Anyway, everyone I think needs to make their own decisions about what their level of safety is when it comes to the PC they use and how they use it and what they allow on it and all of that sort of shit. I think Windows is generally pretty good about keeping itself safe in most generalized use. If you're not doing anything too funky with it, if you're not out there on the worst, weirdest parts of the internet, you're not always going to find the crazy bad shit. And this kernel level anti-cheat stuff, it's bad. It shouldn't happen. But until we've seen a ton of active exploits that exploit those particular types of anti-cheat and all that stuff, no one's going to, you know, people are going to get up in arms about it and they're going to continue to play the game. So it's sort of, it's difficult for me to know where my line is these days. When the news about Valorant came out, I uninstalled Valorant, but also I don't like Valorant. So it was a very easy one for me to go like, oh yeah, okay. I don't care about this game anyway, so this works out. But with so many more games using it these days, it's really hard to, you know, I think it's hard to figure out where you're going to draw the line. And also, I think that a lot of, again, you know, there's something inherent to using a PC on the internet these days. Is your router patched? There was a thing recently about like, hey, by the way, China is infecting a lot of American routers these days. And if you're on this type of router, the government might contact you and say, hey, you need to fix this shit. So just assume that everything is fucked all the time. You're going to get your emails from haveibeenpwned.com every so often and go like, this fucking bullshit website I used to buy shoes once 9 years ago got hacked. And now those credentials are out there. Do I care about those credentials, or did I use those credentials anywhere else? No. I currently get an email from Facebook. Like not daily, but damn near. I get emails from Facebook that are like, hey, did you try to log into Facebook? And I was like, no, no, I did not. Because my email address or whatever email address I have on Facebook was in some other set of credentials. And so Facebook just generates an email automatically, even when they don't have the right password, so it's not even a case where they have the password, because that's, and they don't have my 2-factor and they don't have blah, blah, blah. But like, shit's fucking bad. I don't know. Like a lot of that stuff is fucking out there. Get a good password manager. Use 2-factor wherever you can. Passkeys seem to be the new thing, and that seems kind of cool. The passkey experience on logging into PlayStation, I found to be kind of awesome. They just turned that on relatively recently, but I can't say yes or no about the kernel level anti-cheat. It's not a good thing that this stuff is existing, but like in the grand scheme of things, we are installing so many funky things, or maybe you're not, I don't know. Like for all I know, Notion has you end up with these like 0-click fucking exploits where like someone sends a malformed image to your phone and suddenly your phone is fucked and they're able to get anything out of your phone. There's that stuff's not being exploited massively in the wild, and Apple patches it and do this and that. Like there's just a lot of, I don't know. The answer is be as careful as you can be within reason. And if you feel that your level of care means that you cannot and will not play games that have kernel level anti-cheat, then I think you should do that. But I would also say, through the relative safety of like, well, at least millions of people are doing this. So if there is an exploit, will I be hit, or will it be all these other people who are playing the game way more than me? Will it be people that are playing this game and streaming it? Will it be people that are playing this game in an esports capacity because they're streaming out their user ID and they're able to get hit that, whatever it is. I think that, there is a certain amount of like, if enough people are doing this, it is somehow potentially slightly safe. But I don't know. It's hard to say. It depends on what the hack is and all that other stuff too. So I'm able to operate in a slightly different way than I think a lot of other people would, because I'm publicly on the internet with my real name. Like that's already done. That's already gone. I don't have that anymore. So there's a certain amount of freedom that comes with that particular aspect of it, of just like, hey, there's certain things about me that are out there in public and whatever else. And in some ways that's slightly freeing, I might say. I don't know. In some ways it's terrible, but hey, what are you gonna do? I'm gonna get going is what I'm gonna do. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll do something. Play some video games. Maybe if I can get this Atari 400 working with external files, I would like to maybe mess around with that a little bit, but we'll see. I think that might need a firmware update, or maybe I'll just need to reformat this USB stick. I'll try that too, and see if I can get there. Or maybe we'll just, I don't know, maybe we'll just play some Maybe I'll just play some Dragon's Dogma 2. Just run around and see if we get the Dragon's Plague or something. Anyway, I'm going to get going. Have yourself a good rest of your Tuesday. Head over to the YouTube channel and sign up there as a guard.bike or is a good way to get there. Go subscribe to that thing and the Patreon, patreon.com/Jeff Gerstmann. You can support this hellish endeavor, and together we will ride it all the way down, baby. And I'd say subscribe to the podcast, but you're already listening to the podcast, so you're probably listening to it in audio form because that's how most people consume it. To which I say, hello. How are you? I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll be back Wednesday with some more video games, or Tuesday with another podcast, depending on what you're into. Friday as well. You know. See you soon. Bye.